If Sultan Mehmed II had failed to breach the walls of Constantinople in 1453, world history might have taken an entirely different path. Had the Ottomans been repelled, could the Byzantine Empire have miraculously revived, or would it have merely postponed the inevitable collapse? In this alternate timeline, Byzantium's survival would likely depend on last-minute military aid from the West. Powers like the papacy, Venice, and Genoa might have provided more active support against their common enemy, the Ottomans. Such cooperation could have softened the schism between Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism, potentially leading to a new religious and political alliance within Europe. For the Ottomans, a failed siege would be a significant psychological and strategic blow. Sultan Mehmed's authority could be undermined, leading to revolts among rival Turkish beyliks in Anatolia. Ottoman expansion westward would be delayed, and their dominance in the Balkans might weaken. Constantinople might never become the imperial capital, and the rise of the Ottoman Empire could slow dramatically, or take an entirely different form. Byzantium, on the other hand, would gain a temporary reprieve, but with ongoing internal political strife, economic weakness, and a fragile military, its long-term survival would still be uncertain. However, with renewed Western support, the city could potentially stabilize and strengthen. A kind of Orthodox Renaissance might even emerge. The Byzantine cultural and spiritual influence over Slavic nations could grow stronger, possibly diminishing Moscow's claim to be the Third Rome. Power dynamics in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Balkans would shift dramatically. Without Ottoman pressure, Europe's Christian kingdoms might remain divided or even unite more firmly. Ottoman campaigns into Central Europe, like the sieges of Vienna, might never happen, profoundly altering European political evolution. In conclusion, the survival of Constantinople in 1453 would not just be a military victory for Byzantium. It would trigger a chain reaction capable of reshaping world history. Ottoman power would be delayed, the Orthodox world could regain influence, and the political-religious map of Europe might look completely different today. During World War II, the Germans believed they had an unbreakable code, the Enigma. Used to encrypt military communications, Enigma had over 150 quintillion possible combinations, changing daily. It was the crown jewel of Nazi secrecy. But in a quiet estate in Bletchley Park, a group of British code breakers, including the brilliant mathematician Alan Turing, were working against time. After years of intense work and the creation of an early computer called the bomb, they finally cracked it. This breakthrough gave the Allies crucial information on German troop movements, U-boat locations, and upcoming attacks. But what if they hadn't? The Battle of the Atlantic could have been lost. German U-boats would have sunk countless Allied supply ships, starving Britain into surrender. The D-Day landings, possibly postponed or completely sabotaged. The war might have lasted until 1947, leading to millions more deaths. With more time, Germany could have accelerated its secret weapons programs, perhaps even reaching the atomic bomb before the US. And geopolitically, the Soviet Union might have expanded further west, reshaping the post-war world in ways we can hardly imagine. Cracking Enigma wasn't just a scientific victory. It was a turning point in human history. Historians estimate it shortened the war by 2 to 4 years. Without it, the 20th century might have looked completely different. So next time you hear about codes, machines, or Alan Turing, remember, sometimes a silent breakthrough is louder than 1,000 bombs. In 1845, one of the British Empire's most ambitious Arctic explorations set sail under the command of Sir John Franklin. Its goal was to chart the elusive Northwest Passage, the sea route that would connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans through the Arctic archipelago. 2 ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, were outfitted with the latest technology of the time. Reinforced iron hulls, steam engines, and enough tinned provisions to last 3 years. The expedition was considered almost invincible. But nature would once again test the limits of human ambition. After navigating into Lancaster Sound, the ships became trapped in the relentless Arctic ice. With 129 officers and crew on board, the expedition was forced to overwinter, hoping the ice would thaw. It never did. Years passed as the men remained stranded in the frozen wilderness. Food supplies began to spoil, and the tinned food, poorly sealed, led to widespread lead poisoning. Malnutrition, scurvy, and the bitter cold took their toll on the crew's bodies and minds. As hope of rescue faded, the crew made the desperate decision in 1848 to abandon the ships and try to trek overland back to civilization. It was a final, tragic gamble that ended in disaster. Testimonies from Inuit hunters and later archaeological evidence revealed that none survived. Some remains showed signs of cannibalism, a horrifying testament to their struggle to stay alive in one of the world's harshest environments. Back in England, the fate of Franklin's expedition became a national obsession. Queen Victoria authorized numerous search parties, which spent decades scouring the Canadian Arctic for any sign of the lost explorers. Ironically, these searches expanded Europe's knowledge of the Arctic and helped map the elusive Northwest Passage that had doomed Franklin's men. Yet the ships themselves remained hidden beneath the ice for more than a century and a half. In the 20th century, archaeologists uncovered frozen bodies on Beechey Island and King William Island, along with journals, personal belongings, and clues that revealed the true horrors the crew endured. Then, in 2014, a major breakthrough came when Canadian researchers located the wreck of HMS Erebus preserved beneath the Arctic waters. 2 years later, HMS Terror was discovered in remarkable condition, offering further insight into the final days of the expedition. The tragedy of the Franklin expedition remains one of the most haunting stories of polar exploration, a stark reminder of humanity's vulnerability in the face of nature's unforgiving extremes. The ordeal reshaped how explorers approached the Arctic and highlighted the vital knowledge of the Inuit peoples, whose skills were often ignored by European adventurers. Today, Franklin's lost ships lie silent beneath the ice, serving as underwater memorials to the men who sought to conquer the Arctic but were instead claimed by it. Their story is not just about discovery. It is a timeless lesson about human courage, hubris, and the desperate will to survive in an environment that yields nothing to pride or technology. On May 7, 1915, while World War I raged across Europe, the RMS Lusitania, a luxury passenger liner traveling from England to America, was torpedoed by the German submarine U-20 off the coast of Ireland. Of the 1,959 people on board, 1,198 lost their lives, including 128 Americans. This tragic event not only caused mass civilian casualties, but also shifted the course of the war. The sinking was initially portrayed as a war crime. British and American media condemned Germany for its brutality. But the deeper story was far more complex. Germany had implemented a naval blockade against Britain, and Britain responded it in kind. As a result, Germany adopted a strategy of unrestricted submarine warfare, in which even civilian ships could be targeted. The British government and naval authorities claimed that the Lusitania was a civilian vessel. However, there were serious allegations that it was secretly transporting military supplies. Germany had warned against boarding such ships and even took out newspaper ads in New York cautioning passengers of the risks. Still, the ship sailed. Official records later showed it carried 4,200 cases of rifle ammunition, artillery shells, and explosives. This raised a haunting question. Were the passengers knowingly sacrificed for strategic gain? Some historians argue that Britain was eager to draw the United States into the war, and that an incident like this could sway public opinion. Indeed, the American public was outraged after the tragedy, though the US did not enter the war immediately. Nevertheless, the sinking helped fuel anti-German sentiment in America, ultimately contributing to the US joining the war in 1917, a turning point in World War I. So what do you think? Was it a calculated provocation or a tragic mistake? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more historical deep dives. In the spring of 1940, one of the darkest secrets of the Soviet Union was buried deep within the Katyn Forest. Following a secret pact with Nazi Germany, the Soviets occupied eastern Poland and took tens of thousands of Polish officers, doctors, professors, and intellectuals as prisoners. They were prisoners of war, disarmed, surrendered. But their fate was far more horrific. Under Stalin's direct orders, the Soviet secret police, NKVD, executed over 22,000 Polish nationals. The Katyn Forest became a grim symbol of this atrocity. And yet, it was only one of several mass burial sites. Others were later discovered in Ukraine and Belarus. Most victims were shot in the head and buried in mass graves, one atop another. But why? They were prisoners of war. So why were they exterminated? To the Soviet regime, these people posed a threat, not with weapons, but with their minds. The majority were members of Poland's educated elite. Stalin aimed to cripple any future resistance by eliminating the nation's leadership and intellectual backbone, erasing a people's memory, silencing their leaders, and crushing their spirit was the fastest way to destroy their future. For decades, the massacre was denied by the Soviets. The blame was placed on the Nazis. It wasn't until 1990 that the Soviet Union officially admitted responsibility. Today, debates over accountability still continue in Russia, while for the Polish people, Katyn remains a site of mourning and memory. This tragedy resonates far beyond Poland. Katyn revealed how easily moral boundaries can be shattered, even during war. It left a deep scar on international law and human conscience. These people were prisoners of war. So why do you think they were massacred? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Once upon a time, there was a superpower that shaped the fate of Europe: Prussia. Known for its military discipline, ironclad army, and determination, Prussia played a dominant role in European politics for centuries. But what happened? How did this mighty country vanish completely from the map? How can a country be erased from history? Prussia's roots go back to the 13th century with the Teutonic Knights. However, modern Prussia was officially established in 1525. Over time, it grew stronger and reached its peak in the 18th century under Frederick the Great, also known as Friedrich the Great. Prussia wasn't only known for military victories, it also set an example for Europe with its education system and efficient bureaucracy. It was a centralized and highly organized state. The year 1871 was a turning point for Prussia. It led the unification of Germany and created the German Empire. But ironically, this unification began to erase Prussia's own identity. People no longer talked about Prussia, but about Germany. Still, Prussia held power behind the scenes. The emperor himself was the king of Prussia. After World War I, everything began to fall apart. Germany was defeated, the empire collapsed, and Prussia was reduced to just a state within the Weimar Republic. Although it continued to exist, its power had faded significantly. In 1932, the Nazi Party intervened and took control of the Prussian state government. This was the last time Prussia had any form of independent authority. With Adolf Hitler's rise to power, the federal structure was dismantled, and Prussia lost all significance. The name remained on maps, but real control was in the hands of the Nazis. After World War II, even the name disappeared. In 1947, the Allied powers officially dissolved Prussia. Its territories were divided among Poland, the Soviet Union, and East and West Germany. Its capital, Berlin, was split in two. Some former Prussian lands, like Kaliningrad, are still under Russian control today. And so, Prussia became just a name in history books. No flag, no capital, no nation. But the most fascinating part: Prussia wasn't destroyed in a single war. It vanished slowly through ideological shifts, border changes, and political decisions. No one conquered it overnight. It was forgotten, piece by piece. So, what do you think? What other countries have completely disappeared from history? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Imagine this: powerful men gathered in a room. a map on the table, rulers in their hands. But this isn't just a geography lesson, it's the story of a continent's fate being decided, with lines drawn in ink, but written in blood. In 1884, a conference held in Berlin didn't just reshape Africa, it changed the course of world history. But how could lines drawn around a table shape the destiny of millions? The Berlin Conference was convened in November 1884 at the invitation of German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. Its official purpose, to regulate the European colonization and trade in Africa. The attendees, Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Portugal, Italy, Spain, 14 nations in total. But noticeably absent was Africa itself. Not a single African representative was invited. The lives of millions were being discussed, without their presence, without their voice. On the surface, the conference aimed to bring order and prevent conflicts among European powers. In reality, it was about carving up a continent to serve European interests. Who gets what? Where are the borders? How do we split the resources? And the answers? They were drawn with straight lines, rulers gliding across maps as if they were merely slicing paper, not dividing people. The decisions made at that table tore apart Africa's natural, cultural, and social fabric. Hundreds of ethnic groups, languages, and communities were ignored. One tribe might be split between French and British control. Enemy tribes were placed within the same borders. The result? Ethnic conflict, civil wars, cultural collapse, and political instability. After the Berlin Conference, Europe's scramble for Africa began in full force. Britain dreamed of a continuous red line from Cape Town to Cairo. France pushed from the west toward the east, and Belgium's King Leopold II turned the Congo into his personal empire. Millions were forced into labor, natural resources were plundered, and identities were crushed. Children in the Congo had their hands cut off for not meeting rubber quotas. Miners perished in collapsed tunnels, digging for gold and diamonds. Many of the modern borders in Africa were drawn in this era, drawn in ignorance and soaked in suffering. Those ruler-drawn lines are still shaping Africa today. Countless civil wars, border disputes, and political crises have their roots in the arbitrary decisions made in Berlin. From the Rwandan genocide to South Sudan's conflicts, many tragedies trace back to this moment in history. But the Berlin Conference didn't just impact Africa. It institutionalized the age of imperialism. It systematized exploitation. It redrew the cultural and political maps of entire continents. In 1884, a group of men drew lines that would shape a continent's destiny. But what if those lines had never been drawn? What if Africa had been allowed to develop on its own terms? What do you think? Did those lines shape the future or steal it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Was the biggest invasion in history dependent on a weather forecast? On the morning of June 6, 1944, a massive military operation that would change the course of history began. Allied forces launched an amphibious assault on the Nazi-occupied shores of Normandy, France. This enormous operation, known as D-Day, was etched into memory forever. But the fate of this mission depended less on tanks or generals and more on the clouds and storms in the sky. Yes, the biggest invasion in history hinged on a weather forecast. It would either be postponed or launched depending on it. By 1944, Nazi Germany controlled much of continental Europe. The Allies were planning a ground operation to end the occupation and restore freedom to Europe. This operation involved a massive sea and air invasion beginning from England and landing in France. Codenamed Operation Overlord, the plan involved hundreds of thousands of troops, tens of thousands of vehicles, and thousands of aircraft. But one thing was crucial for the success of this massive undertaking: perfect weather conditions. The importance of weather in the Normandy landings wasn't just about troop morale. The operation would start with landing crafts hitting the beaches, followed by paratroopers dropping behind enemy lines. Therefore, the sea needed to be calm. High waves could capsize the landing craft, winds had to be moderate. Paratroopers needed to land accurately on target. Cloud cover had to be minimal. Air forces had to provide bombing and aerial support. Moonlight was essential. Night operations required adequate visibility. A minor shift in the weather could lead to thousands of deaths, the collapse of the operation, and the prolonging of the war by years. British and American meteorological teams had been studying the weather weeks in advance to identify suitable dates for the operation. The original plan was to carry out the landing on the morning of June 5, 1944. However, poor weather conditions starting on June 3rd threatened the entire plan. A low-pressure system from the Atlantic brought strong winds and thick clouds. This is where a now famous meteorologist entered the scene. Group Captain James Stagg of the Royal Air Force. Stagg was responsible for briefing General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the commander of the operation, directly. On the morning of June 4th, Stagg made a bold prediction. Currently, there's a storm. But on the morning of June 6th, there will be a short window of clear weather. The sea will calm, the winds will drop, and the clouds will break. Some meteorologists disagreed with this forecast, arguing that the weather would not improve. Eisenhower had two choices: delay the invasion for weeks, giving the Germans time to prepare, or trust Stagg's prediction and proceed during the brief window. Eisenhower took one of the biggest gambles in military history. He trusted Stagg's forecast and postponed the operation to June 6, 1944. The result? Just as predicted, weather conditions improved dramatically on the morning of June 6th. The sea was calmer, the wind lighter, and the skies clearer. Allied forces used this rare meteorological window to carry out the invasion successfully. The Germans, assuming no attack would come during such poor weather, were caught off guard. Nazi commander Erwin Rommel was even away in Germany, celebrating his wife's birthday. This sudden and successful strike allowed Allied forces to gain a foothold in Europe, leading to the liberation of Paris and ultimately Germany's defeat. History is often shaped by generals, soldiers, and leaders. But the fate of D-Day may have rested in the hands of a meteorologist. James Stagg's ability to spot a brief break in the storm saved countless lives and helped alter the course of the war. This event reminds us how fragile history can be. The fate of nations, weapons, and armies can sometimes be decided by the shift of a single cloud. D-Day's success wasn't just a triumph of strategy, it was a delicate dance with nature. If the skies had remained just a bit more clouded that morning, history could have turned out very differently. Weather was not just a side note, it was a decisive force. So what other small factors do you think have had a major impact on history? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe and share the video. A seat, a woman, and a silent revolution. In 1955, in Montgomery, Alabama, what seemed like an ordinary evening changed the course of history forever. A black woman named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus to a white passenger. It may have seemed like a simple matter of a seat, but that one word, no, became a symbol of resistance for millions. So how did one quiet act spark the awakening of a nation? In the mid-20th century, the United States was governed, especially in the South, by a set of racist laws known as Jim Crow. These laws kept black and white people separated in public places. Buses, schools, restaurants, restrooms, hospitals, all were separate but equal. But in reality, there was no equality. Black Americans were treated as second-class citizens, systematically oppressed, denied voting rights, and subjected to violence. In Montgomery, segregation on buses was especially strict. The front rows were reserved for white passengers, while black passengers had to sit at the back. If a white person was standing, black passengers were expected to give up their seat. Rosa Parks was an ordinary woman, but not an average one. At 42 years old, she worked as a seamstress and was an active member of the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. She was soft-spoken, calm, polite, but fiercely committed to justice. In fact, other black passengers had refused to give up their seats before Rosa. But Rosa's resolve, her organizational background, and the timing of her act made her defiance the spark that lit the fire. On December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks finished work and boarded her usual bus. As the bus filled up, a white man was left standing. The driver ordered Rosa and others in her row to give up their seats. 3 passengers stood. Rosa remained seated. The driver snapped, "If you don't stand up, I'll call the police." Rosa answered quietly, "You may do that." She was arrested, but her arrest would trigger a chain reaction. The next day, outrage swept through the black community. Rosa's arrest became a symbol of the daily humiliation faced by an entire people. Leaders gathered. Among them was a young preacher, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. At the meeting, a decision was made. Black citizens would boycott the buses. The Montgomery bus boycott had begun. Initially expected to last a few days, the boycott endured for 381 days. Black residents walked miles to work. They organized carpool systems. White citizens retaliated. Black cars were vandalized. Homes were bombed. Rosa Parks was fired from her job. But they did not back down. Led by Martin Luther King Jr., the peaceful protest gained national attention. Newspapers across the country featured Rosa's quiet defiance and the community's courage. In December 1956, 1 year after Rosa's arrest, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled segregation on public buses was unconstitutional. Montgomery buses could no longer enforce racial separation. This wasn't just a victory for public transport, it was the beginning of the modern civil rights movement in America. Rosa Parks became an icon of freedom. Her silent stand inspired marches, laws, and a national transformation. Rosa Parks' legacy lives on far beyond her passing. The U.S. Congress named her the Mother of the Freedom Movement. When she passed away in 2005, she became the first black woman to lie in honor in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda. Her story is a powerful reminder. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply sits and refuses to move. Rosa didn't speak loudly, but the world heard her. A seat on a bus became the battlefield for one of the most powerful struggles for equality. So now I ask you, can silence be the loudest scream of all? Tell us in the comments and share this story to inspire someone else. France wanted to erase the painful memories of World War I. And to never be crushed by Germany again, they built one of the most expensive defense systems in history. But there was one mistake. A mistake that changed the fate of millions. The Maginot Line. It was supposed to stop the next war. But why did it fail? After World War I, France had learned a brutal lesson. Millions had died in the trenches. So they decided to build a massive wall of defense along the German border. Named after war veteran and Minister of War André Maginot, this line was an engineering marvel. Underground bunkers, artillery posts, tunnels, and even railways. It was a fortress buried deep beneath the earth. The goal? If Germany attacked again, this line would stop them. But there was a problem. Actually, several problems. First, the Maginot Line was built only along the German border. France assumed Belgium would stay neutral, and the Ardennes forest was thought to be impassable. But the Germans did the unexpected. In 1940, Nazi Germany invaded through Belgium, bypassing the Maginot Line entirely. That massive wall, it was never even used, and it came at a huge cost. Billions of francs were spent, years of construction, brilliant engineering, but all of it was pointed in the wrong direction. Technically, the Maginot Line was flawless. But strategically, it was a disaster, because wars aren't won with walls alone. They're won with strategy. Hitler's forces moved fast and unpredictably. This wasn't trench warfare anymore. This was blitzkrieg, fast, mobile, and deadly. And the Maginot Line just stood there, waiting for an enemy that never came. The Maginot Line is now remembered as one of history's greatest strategic failures. France prepared for the last war, but the next war was entirely different. And still today, historians ask, were billions of francs wasted? Could this be the most expensive lesson in history? Let me know what you think in the comments. In 1861, as the American Civil War erupted and the nation was on the brink of collapse, President Abraham Lincoln made a surprising diplomatic move. He sent a letter, not to a European power or a neighboring nation, but to Sultan Abdulaziz of the Ottoman Empire. At first glance, this might seem irrelevant. After all, what connection could exist between a war-torn America and a declining Muslim empire half a world away? But this letter wasn't just diplomatic protocol. It had a deeper meaning, one tied to religious freedom, minority rights, and America's image on the world stage. So, what exactly was Lincoln trying to achieve? Let's go back to the beginning. When Lincoln assumed the presidency in March of 1861, the country was already splintering. 11 southern states had declared secession, forming the Confederate States of America. The issue of slavery had ignited a civil war that would become the deadliest conflict in U.S. history. Lincoln was under immense pressure, not only to preserve the Union, but to ensure that foreign powers did not lend legitimacy or support to the Confederacy. International recognition of the Confederacy was a real threat. If powerful nations like Britain, France, or others saw the Confederacy as an independent state, they might provide military or economic aid, something that could tip the scales of war. So Lincoln and his administration worked tirelessly to maintain diplomatic ties and emphasize that the Union represented lawful government, stability, and freedom. This is where the Ottoman Empire enters the picture. In the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire was no longer the global force it had been, but it was still strategically important. Its control of key trade routes and its geographic position, connecting Europe, Asia, and Africa, made it an empire that still commanded respect. Under Sultan Abdulaziz, who ruled from 1861 to 1876, the empire was going through a period of transformation. Known as the Tanzimat era, this was a time of reform, modernization, and attempts to centralize and strengthen the state. Although internally strained by nationalist movements and external pressures, the Ottomans remained diplomatically active and influential in global affairs. Lincoln recognized this and made a highly symbolic gesture. Rather than ask for military support or political recognition, he sent a message that reflected one of America's core values: religious liberty. In his letter, Lincoln requested that Muslims living in the United States be granted the right to appoint their own religious leaders, muftis, who could guide them in religious and legal matters according to Islamic principles. Now, why was this significant? First, this showed that Lincoln acknowledged the presence of Muslims in the United States. Even though their numbers were small, most were African Muslims brought through the transatlantic slave trade, but others were immigrants or converts. By recognizing their need for religious representation, Lincoln was essentially saying, "You are part of this nation, and your faith is respected." Second, this move had symbolic weight abroad. By reaching out to a Muslim ruler and affirming the rights of Muslims in America, Lincoln sent a powerful message. The Union stood not only for unity, but also for tolerance and inclusion, values that contrasted sharply with the Confederacy's ideology. Third, Lincoln's letter strengthened diplomatic ties with the Ottoman Empire. It showed respect for the Sultan's religious authority and acknowledged the spiritual connection that Muslims around the world shared, even across borders. In return, the Ottoman Empire continued to view the Union favorably and did not recognize the Confederacy, a small but meaningful win for Lincoln's foreign policy. This letter may not have changed the course of the war, but it reflected something deeper. Even in the darkest hours of civil conflict, Lincoln didn't lose sight of the principles that defined the American experiment: liberty, equality, and religious freedom. And he knew that the eyes of the world were watching. So, what do you think? Was Lincoln's letter just a symbolic gesture of goodwill, or was it a clever diplomatic move to boost the Union's international standing Let us know in the comments below. It was early 1917. The world was in the midst of one of the greatest wars in history. On one side, the Allied powers. On the other, the Central Powers. The United States had so far managed to stay out of the conflict, but one telegram would change the course of history. A message crossed the ocean, fell into the wrong hands, and altered the fate of millions. So, what did this message say? And why did it push America into war? Germany was struggling on the front lines of World War I. Their naval blockade against Britain seemed effective, but it wasn't enough. The US had not yet entered the war, and for Germany, that was a major advantage. But it didn't last long. On January 16, 1917, German Foreign Minister Arthur Zimmermann sent a secret telegram to the Mexican government. Its content was shocking. If the United States goes to war against Germany, Mexico should join forces with us. In return, you will regain the territories you lost to the US, Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. But Germany forgot one crucial thing. The undersea cables running across the Atlantic were monitored by the British. British intelligence intercepted the message and quickly decrypted it. At first, they hesitated to reveal it. They didn't want Germany to know they'd cracked their codes. But soon they made a decision. This message had to be shared with America. The telegram was handed to US officials. President Woodrow Wilson found it hard to believe at first, but once the message was verified, everything changed. The American public was outraged. The press ran it as front-page news. The people no longer wanted neutrality. They demanded war against the country that threatened their safety. Zimmermann at first denied the message, but then, in a stunning move, he confirmed its authenticity. He said, "Yes, we sent that message. It was a precaution in case America entered the war." That statement only fueled American anger. And on April 6, 1917, the United States declared war on Germany, a decision that completely changed the course of the war. The Zimmermann telegram wasn't just a message, it was a diplomatic suicide that changed the fate of a nation. Germany wanted to keep the US out of the war, but by sending this telegram, it ensured the opposite. America's entry brought massive support to the Allies. Millions of soldiers, immense industrial power, and financial aid that tipped the balance of the war. But was this message really necessary? Did Germany truly believe Mexico would declare war on the US? Many historians argue Mexico was too troubled by internal issues to consider such a move. The truth is, this telegram wasn't just an alliance proposal. It was a breach of national security. The American people couldn't tolerate a threat to their territory. And here's another interesting detail. The telegram was written in German, intercepted by the British, translated into English, and then sent to the American government. It passed through 3 different nations, but ultimately it affected millions of lives. The Zimmermann telegram was a turning point in history. A message sent in the middle of a war pushed America from neutrality into the battlefield, and perhaps decided the outcome of World War I. But here's the real question. If a country promises another nation territory that isn't theirs, is that an act of war? Share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes it's the smallest details in history that shake the world. World War II was shaped not only by battles on the front lines, but also by technological advancements that changed the course of history. Toward the end of the war, Nazi Germany developed several experimental projects that have since gained a mysterious and legendary status. One of the most striking among them was the so-called Great Berlin Air, a term used to refer to various secret projects that had the potential to change the fate of the war. However, before these projects could be fully realized, the war ended, and many of the plans remained mere speculation. In this video, we'll explore the truths and myths behind Nazi Germany's secret weapon projects. At the beginning of the war, Nazi Germany emerged as a formidable military power. But as the war dragged on, Germany's economic and military resources began to dwindle. This situation forced the Nazi government to turn toward innovative and often secret military technologies. By the end of the war, Germany was attempting to develop high-tech weapons that could alter the course of the conflict. One of Nazi Germany's most famous secret weapons was the V-2 rocket, the world's first long-range ballistic missile. These rockets were used in attacks against Britain, the Netherlands, and other European countries. But the legacy of the V-2 was more than just military. It symbolized Germany's push for technological dominance. The technology used in the development of the V-2 rockets laid the foundation for modern space travel. For Nazi Germany, these rockets represented more than weapons. They were symbols of scientific prestige. Hitler hoped to use such projects to showcase Nazi ideology and represent ultimate victory. Yet, by the war's end, these rockets became a disappointment in the public eye, as they failed to deliver the expected military impact. Another mysterious Nazi project centered around flying saucers and theories of time travel, most notably the alleged device called Die Glocke, the bell. This project is claimed to have involved Nazi scientists and engineers working on anti-gravity technologies and advanced flying machines. According to several sources, Die Glocke was either a high-tech weapon or a device capable of producing flying saucers. However, there is no concrete evidence about its results. Some theories argue that the entire concept was pure science fiction, an illusion meant to distract from Germany's imminent defeat. Nazi Germany began the war with strong air superiority, but as the war progressed, its advantage began to fade. Still, Germany made notable advances in aviation. The Messerschmitt Me 262 was the world's first operational jet-powered fighter aircraft and was deployed late in the war. The Me 262 and other jet aircraft had the potential to revolutionize air combat. However, their late introduction meant they didn't have enough time to change the course of the war significantly. As World War II neared its end, Germany's fronts rapidly collapsed. Allied advances and the Soviet onslaught from the east had devastating effects on Nazi Germany. Yet rather than accepting defeat, the regime continued to work on secret projects that might alter the outcome. Hitler's increasing focus on scientific and technological projects in the war's final phase reflected a desperate attempt to turn the tide. The emphasis on secret weapon projects was a manifestation of this last-ditch effort. With the end of the war, many of Nazi Germany's secret technological projects vanished. Allied forces raided numerous research facilities across Germany and managed to recover some of these projects. However, most were either unfinished or too advanced to be fully understood at the time. As a result, many of these technologies were taken over by the United States and the Soviet Union, marking the beginning of the Cold War's technological race. Nazi rocket technology in particular played a major role in shaping the space race. The V-2 rocket's design later influenced the space exploration programs of both superpowers. Today, Nazi Germany's secret weapon projects remain a subject of historical intrigue and speculation. V-2 rockets, jet fighters, and rumored flying saucers continue to captivate the imagination. However, most of these projects were too underdeveloped or flawed to have had a decisive impact during the war. These efforts reflected Nazi Germany's emphasis on science and technology, but ultimately turned into symbols of failure and desperation. Still, they continued to attract the interest of historians and conspiracy theorists alike. Perhaps we will never fully uncover the truth behind these secret projects, but they remain enduring mysteries of one of history's darkest eras. With the war's end, many of these projects disappeared into the depths of history, yet they continue to live on as unresolved enigmas. In 1815, the Tambora volcano in Indonesia erupted with such force that it caused one of the most catastrophic and deadliest disasters in recorded history. The eruption was so immense that its sound could be heard over 2,600 kilometers away. But the true impact wasn't immediately apparent. Instead, it left the entire world in shock as its after-effects were felt years later. What if we told you that this single eruption changed the course of history, and if something like it happened today, it could dramatically alter the world as we know it? Would we be prepared for such a disaster? Let's dive into one of the most extraordinary events in history. The eruption of Mount Tambora was classified as VEI 7, which places it among the most powerful volcanic eruptions ever recorded. Tambora released 100 cubic kilometers of volcanic matter, including ash, gas, and aerosols, which was enough to block out the sun. This led to a global temperature drop of approximately 3 degrees Celsius, triggering a phenomenon known as the Year Without a Summer in 1816. This eruption was so severe that Europe, North America, and parts of Asia experienced unusually cold temperatures. In New England, snow fell in the middle of July, something completely unheard of. But the worst consequence of all was the devastation to global crops. Crops failed across many regions, particularly in Europe and the United States. In China, rice crops were destroyed and food shortages escalated. Europe witnessed widespread famine, which led to massive food riots. As a result, millions of people faced hunger and poverty. But Tambora didn't only change the climate, it also shaped the world of art and literature. Mary Shelley, writing in the aftermath of the eruption, took inspiration from the dark and cold atmosphere and went on to write her legendary novel, Frankenstein, a tale of creation, destruction, and the unknown. Her novel was directly influenced by the eerily somber environment she was living in, creating a powerful narrative in a time of crisis. The eruption of Tambora didn't just alter the climate, it altered human history. The question remains, if a similar eruption occurred in the modern world, what would happen? Would we be able to handle it better, or would it plunge us into chaos? Today, our world is far more interconnected than in the 19th century. Our economies, agriculture, and weather systems are all linked. A modern Tambora eruption would likely cause massive disruptions to the global food supply, severe climate shifts, and widespread economic collapse. Countries with large populations, especially those dependent on agriculture, would struggle to feed their citizens, and famine could become a serious threat. The modern world has the technology to forecast eruptions and study their effects, but would we really be prepared for something of this scale? In a world already facing climate change, economic inequality, and political instability, the consequences could be far-reaching and long-lasting. What do you think? If such an eruption were to happen today, how would the world cope? Could we adapt quickly enough to prevent widespread disaster, or would humanity be thrown into turmoil? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you don't want to miss out on other fascinating historical events, make sure to subscribe. Imagine you're in the middle of a war. Your city is the target of enemy bombers. Aircrafts are flying overhead, and at any moment they could destroy everything you know. What if you could build a fake city to deceive them? During World War I, French engineers thought of exactly that. By 1917, German bombers were targeting Paris. The French, facing one of the most critical moments of the war, developed an unusual plan: to build a fake Paris just north of the real one. This fake city was meant to mislead enemy aircraft into bombing the wrong place. However, this extraordinary project was never completed. What kind of city was it? And could it have actually worked? French authorities planned an innovative deception system to make it difficult for enemy planes to locate Paris. The fake Paris was to be built a few kilometers north of the real city, mimicking original streets, train stations, factories, and even the reflection of the Seine River. Engineers were working on details to mislead enemy pilots. Wooden buildings, mock industrial areas, and even fake illuminated streets at night were part of the plan. Additionally, the reflections of the river were to be recreated using special light systems. The main goal was to confuse enemy pilots during nighttime air raids. At the time, aircraft navigation systems were not highly developed, and pilots relied on city lights to navigate. If the fake Paris could be convincing enough, German bombers would bomb the fake city instead of the real one. However, as the construction of the fake city progressed, the course of the war changed. By 1918, the war was nearing its end, and the need for such deceptive tactics had diminished. Moreover, As air raids and bomb damage became more devastating, the ability of fake buildings to deceive the enemy was fading. In the end, the fake Paris project was never completed. Although the French army and engineers had begun building it, the project was abandoned when the war ended. The fake streets, train stations, and buildings were never used and faded into the pages of history. Today, this event is considered one of the most interesting deception tactics used during wartime. If the plan had been completed and used, do you think it would have worked? Could this fake city have protected Paris from the bombings? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you don't want to miss out on other fascinating historical events, make sure to subscribe. What if I told you that a disease in just 5 years wiped out nearly half of Europe's population? It's hard to imagine, but it's true. The Black Death, one of the deadliest pandemics in human history, caused unimaginable devastation, leaving cities in ruins and altering the course of history forever. Imagine waking up to a world where the streets are silent, the fields empty, and the once thriving cities are now filled with death and fear. What could have caused such a catastrophe? The year is 1347. In the bustling Mediterranean ports, ships dock carrying cargo, but something is terribly wrong. Their crew members are not unloading crates or greeting family members, but rather they are found lifeless on the decks, their bodies covered in dark, swollen boils. A strange and terrifying disease had arrived. The people on shore, already wary of such events, could hardly imagine what was coming. They had no idea that this wasn't just another sickness. This was the Black Death, and it would change the world forever. The disease didn't wait. It spread rapidly. The Black Death first made its way through the trading routes, like the veins of Europe, using the Silk Road and other routes to travel from the east to the west. The Black Death's journey began in Asia, specifically in China, where it was believed to have started in the region of Mongolia. From there, it spread across the vast landmass of Asia, reaching the Middle East and then, eventually, Europe. As European ships docked in Mediterranean ports, the plague found its way into the hearts of the continent. At the time, there was no understanding of germs or how diseases spread. The people believed that bad air, or miasma, was responsible. However, the truth was even worse. It wasn't the air, but rather infected fleas carried by rats that spread the deadly bacteria called Yersinia pestis. The fleas bit rats, which often lived aboard ships or in homes. As the rats died, the fleas found new hosts, humans. The symptoms of the Black Death were terrifyingly fast and brutal. Infected people would develop fever, chills, and painful buboes, swollen lymph nodes that could become as large as an orange. The buboes turned dark, often purple or black, which led to the name Black Death. Victims often died within just a few days, sometimes hours, of showing symptoms. Imagine feeling fine one moment and then, within a matter of hours, being struck with a fever, your body covered in painful boils, and your life slipping away. One of the most horrifying aspects of the plague was its speed. Entire villages were wiped out in a matter of days. In major cities like Florence, Paris, and London, the disease struck without warning. In some places, it was so rampant that it would take only a week or two for the population to be decimated. This left survivors stunned, desperate, and in many cases, utterly broken. By the time the Black Death had spread across Europe, it had wiped out a staggering 30 to 60% of the population. Entire communities were left desolate, and the effects on Europe's economy were devastating. With so many people dead, there was no one to tend to the fields, no one to work the trades, no one to run the markets. This collapse in labor created an unprecedented crisis, but it also led to the eventual rise in wages for surviving workers as the demand for their labor skyrocketed. Cities were overwhelmed with death, and burial grounds were unable to keep up with the number of victims. In some places, mass graves were dug to accommodate the bodies, while in others, the dead were simply left in the streets. The sheer scale of the catastrophe led people to question everything they had once believed in: their governments, their religion, and even their own existence. As the death toll continued to rise, fear spread even faster than the disease. People had no idea how to protect themselves. Some thought the plague was a punishment from God for their sins. Others believed it was the work of witches or even the Jews, who were blamed and persecuted in many parts of Europe. In places like Strasbourg, mobs attacked Jewish communities, blaming them for poisoning wells, even though there was no evidence to support such accusations. Many people, desperate to save themselves, turned to superstition. Some carried herbs and flowers to ward off the disease, while others fled cities in hopes of escaping the deadly grip of the plague. Wealthy people, fearing for their lives, left their homes and hid in the countryside, but it didn't always help. The plague found its way everywhere, infecting both the rich and the poor. Religion played a significant role during the Black Death, especially as many people turned to faith to make sense of the unimaginable loss. Some believed that the plague was divine punishment for humanity's sins and turned to the church for answers. Religious processions were held in cities, with people flagellating themselves, hoping to appease God. But the church, despite its power, had little understanding of the cause of the plague or how to stop it. In fact, the church's failure to protect people from the disease led to a significant loss of trust in its authority. However, the Black Death didn't just erode faith, it also changed the religious landscape. In some regions, the plague led to a rise in radical religious movements, while in others, it encouraged a more questioning, skeptical approach to faith. The aftermath of the plague saw Europe's religious institutions face serious challenges, and some of the deep-seated changes would contribute to the eventual rise of the Renaissance and the Reformation. The long-term effects of the Black Death were profound. Not only did it reshape the economic structure of Europe, but it also led to significant social and political changes. With so many people dead, the feudal system, which had structured European society for centuries, began to unravel. The labor shortages caused by the plague led to demands for higher wages and better working conditions, which in turn sparked labor revolts across Europe. The Black Death also led to a shift in the way people viewed life and death. It became clear that the world was not as predictable or controllable as many had once thought. The notion of death became a more prominent part of cultural expressions, art, and literature. In the arts, we see a shift from the idealized depictions of life to darker, more realistic portrayals of death. This is seen in works like Danse Macabre, where death is depicted as a constant companion, leading people from all walks of life to their inevitable end. Those who survived the Black Death faced their own set of challenges. In addition to the trauma of losing loved ones, the survivors were often left to rebuild communities that were no longer the same. Entire villages were gone, and many survivors found themselves grappling with intense grief, anxiety, and even guilt, wondering why they had survived when so many others hadn't. The plague had a psychological toll as well, with many people experiencing post-traumatic stress. Survivors often found it difficult to return to their normal lives, and some communities took years, even decades, to recover from the social and emotional scars left by the Black Death. What do you think about the Black Death? How do you think a pandemic like this would affect our world today? Could we have done anything to prevent it back then? And how do you think it shaped the world we live in now? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's discuss how this historical event changed Europe forever. What if I told you that a single event changed the course of history forever? That a single revolution could topple a monarchy that ruled for centuries and give birth to modern democracy? But at what cost? Thousands were executed, kings and queens lost their heads, and chaos reigned in the streets of Paris. Was it truly a fight for freedom, or did it spiral into madness? Stay with me as we unravel the dramatic and bloody story of the French Revolution. To understand the French Revolution, we need to go back to the late 18th century. France was ruled by King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette, a royal couple living in unimaginable luxury at the Palace of Versailles. Meanwhile, the common people, peasants, workers, and the growing middle class, were suffering under high taxes, food shortages, and a crumbling economy. But why was France in such a terrible state? A series of costly wars, including support for the American Revolution, had drained the country's treasury. The monarchy continued to spend lavishly while the people struggled to survive. Bread, the staple food of the French people, became so expensive that riots broke out in the streets. Then came the Estates General in 1789, a gathering of representatives from France's three social classes: the clergy, the nobility, and the commoners. But the commoners, or the Third Estate, were always outvoted by the privileged classes. Frustrated and determined to make a change, they broke away and formed the National Assembly, declaring themselves the true representatives of the people. This act of defiance marked the beginning of the revolution. Then, on July 14th, 1789, everything exploded. The people of Paris, fearing that the king would use the army against them, stormed the Bastille, a massive fortress prison that symbolized royal tyranny. The prison had only a handful of prisoners, but that didn't matter. The Bastille was a symbol of oppression. The revolutionaries seized weapons, killed the prison's governor, and paraded his head on a pike. The message was clear. The people were rising. As the revolution gained momentum, the National Assembly took action. On August 26, 1789, they issued the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, a document that proclaimed liberty, equality, and fraternity for all. But was France truly heading toward a just society, or was it about to plunge into chaos? King Louis XVI was not ready to give up his throne. He attempted to flee France with his family in 1791, but he was caught and brought back to Paris. The people saw him as a traitor, and their anger grew. By 1792, France was at war with Austria and Prussia, as other European monarchies feared the spread of revolution. The French government was in turmoil, and radical revolutionaries took control. On August 10th, 1792, a mob stormed the Tuileries Palace, where the royal family was staying. The monarchy was officially abolished, and the king was put on trial. In January 1793, King Louis XVI was executed by guillotine. His wife, Marie Antoinette, was executed months later. France was no longer a monarchy, it was a republic. But instead of peace, the revolution spiraled into terror. Maximilien Robespierre, a leading radical, took control of the government. He believed that the revolution could only succeed through extreme measures. This led to the infamous Reign of Terror, where thousands of people were arrested and executed for being enemies of the revolution. The guillotine became the ultimate symbol of the revolution. Nobles, priests, and even revolutionaries who questioned Robespierre's rule were sent to their deaths. The most chilling part? Some of these people were executed based on mere suspicion. Even former allies of Robespierre, like Georges Danton, were not safe. But power is a dangerous thing. Robespierre himself became too powerful, and in 1794 he was arrested and executed. The Reign of Terror ended, but the damage was done. After the fall of Robespierre, France was left in chaos. The government was weak, corruption was rampant, and the country was still at war. In the midst of this instability, one man saw an opportunity: Napoleon Bonaparte. A brilliant military commander, Napoleon used his victories in battle to gain political influence. By 1799, he staged a coup and took control of the government. At first, Napoleon presented himself as a leader who would restore order and uphold the values of the revolution. But soon, he crowned himself Emperor of France in 1804, marking the end of the Republic. France had gone from a monarchy to a revolution, then to a dictatorship. So, was the French Revolution a success or a failure? It overthrew a monarchy, introduced ideas of democracy, and inspired revolutions around the world. But it also led to years of war, thousands of executions, and a return to authoritarian rule under Napoleon. What do you think? Was the revolution necessary, or did it go too far? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for historical videos. What if one day everything you knew was taken away? Your home, your rights, even your very existence. The Holocaust, also known as the Shoah, was one of the darkest events in human history. Between 1941 and 1945, Nazi Germany carried out the systematic, state-sponsored genocide of approximately 6 million Jews. But the Holocaust was not just an attack on Jews. The Nazi regime also targeted Romani people, disabled individuals, political dissidents, LGBTQ+ individuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, and others they deemed undesirable. The goal was total extermination, carried out through an industrialized system of mass murder. How did a society allow such a horror to unfold? The seeds of the Holocaust were planted long before the killings began. Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party rose to power in the early 1930s, exploiting economic hardship and public dissatisfaction. Nazi ideology promoted the belief in the supremacy of the so-called Aryan race, while scapegoating Jews for Germany's struggles. Propaganda fueled anti-Semitism, depicting Jews as enemies of the state. In 1935, the Nuremberg Laws stripped Jews of their citizenship and legal rights, marking the first step in their systematic persecution. As Nazi Germany expanded across Europe, the persecution of Jews and other targeted groups intensified. Millions were forced into overcrowded ghettos under unbearable conditions, where starvation and disease were rampant. Many did not survive. But the Nazis had an even more sinister plan: the final solution. This was the code name for their systematic plan to exterminate Jews across Europe. Deportations to concentration camps and extermination camps soon followed. Victims were crammed into cattle cars, often traveling for days without food, water, or sanitation. Upon arrival at camps like Auschwitz-Birkenau, Treblinka, and Sobibor, families were torn apart. Many were immediately sent to gas chambers disguised as showers. Others were subjected to forced labor, starvation, brutal medical experiments, or mass shootings. Auschwitz alone became the most infamous site of the Holocaust, where over 1 million Jews were murdered. Those who were not sent directly to the gas chambers faced backbreaking labor, abuse, and medical torture. The Nazis viewed prisoners not as human beings, but as disposable tools for their war effort. By the time the war ended in 1945, the scale of destruction was almost unimaginable. 6 million Jews, 2/3 of Europe's Jewish population, had been murdered, along with millions of others. When Allied forces liberated the concentration camps, they were met with scenes of horror: mass graves, emaciated survivors barely clinging to life, and the remnants of Nazi cruelty. The world could no longer deny the extent of what had happened. Could such an atrocity happen again? In the aftermath, the world sought justice. The Nuremberg trials prosecuted Nazi leaders, establishing legal precedents for crimes against humanity. The Holocaust also led to the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, an effort to prevent future genocides. But despite these efforts, history has shown that genocide and persecution still occur. The lessons of the Holocaust are more relevant than ever. Remembering the Holocaust is not just about looking back. It is about taking action. Institutions like Yad Vashem and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum preserve the memory of the victims and educate future generations. January 27th, International Holocaust Remembrance Day, marks the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz and serves as a global reminder of the dangers of hatred and indifference. Despite the horror, stories of resistance and courage emerged. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising saw Jewish fighters take a stand against the Nazis. People like Oskar Schindler, Raoul Wallenberg, and countless others risked their lives to save Jews from certain death. Their actions prove that even in the face of overwhelming evil, individual choices matter. The Holocaust is not just a tragic chapter in history, it is a warning. A reminder of how hatred, propaganda, and silence can lead to unimaginable consequences. Have you ever seen or heard of examples where propaganda was used to target a group of people? How can we fight that today? Let me know in the comments. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that staying in your hometown means a life of struggle, poverty, and fear. But leaving, that could mean opportunity, freedom, and a fresh start. What would you do? Between 1910 and 1970, over 6 million African Americans faced this exact choice. They left behind everything they knew, their homes, families, and communities, hoping to escape racial violence and economic hardship in the South. Their journey, known as the Great Migration, didn't just change their lives. It reshaped the United States forever. The early 20th century was a time of severe racial discrimination in the southern United States. The Jim Crow laws enforced segregation, ensuring that African Americans were treated as second-class citizens. Schools, public transportation, restaurants, and even drinking fountains were separated by race. But segregation was just one part of the problem. White supremacist groups terrorized black communities, and lynchings were widespread. According to historical records, thousands of African Americans were murdered simply for challenging the racial hierarchy or for accusations that were never proven. On top of these dangers, economic opportunities for African Americans in the South were nearly non-existent. Most were trapped in a system called sharecropping, where they farmed land owned by white landlords in exchange for a portion of the crops. But this system was designed to keep black farmers in poverty. Landowners charged high fees for supplies, manipulated contracts, and often left sharecroppers in endless cycles of debt. Meanwhile, in the North, a different world was emerging. The Industrial Revolution had transformed cities like Chicago, Detroit, New York, and Pittsburgh into economic powerhouses. Factories, steel mills, and railroads were booming, and they needed workers. When World War I began, thousands of white men went to fight in Europe, leaving factories desperate for labor. For many African Americans in the South, this was the opportunity they had been waiting for. Between 1910 and 1940, approximately 1.6 million African Americans left the South in search of a better life. The journey north was not easy. Many families had little money and had to travel by train, bus, or even on foot. Some were tricked by recruiters who promised jobs that didn't exist. Others were stopped by white authorities who tried to prevent them from leaving. Newspapers like the Chicago Defender played a crucial role in spreading information about opportunities in the North. They encouraged black families to move, published job listings, and warned about the dangers they might face on the journey. Once arrived in cities like New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago, they faced new challenges. While there were no Jim Crow laws in the North, racism was still deeply rooted in society. Many white residents resented the arrival of black workers, fearing job competition. Some African Americans found jobs in factories, but they were often given the lowest paying and most dangerous positions. Labor unions frequently excluded black workers, making it difficult to fight for better conditions. Housing was another major issue. White landlords refused to rent to black families in many areas, forcing them into overcrowded neighborhoods. Places like Chicago's South Side and Harlem in New York became heavily populated black communities. Housing segregation policies, such as redlining, ensured that these neighborhoods remained underdeveloped, with poor infrastructure, schools, and healthcare services. Despite these hardships, African American communities in the North began to thrive. The Harlem Renaissance, a cultural movement of the 1920s, brought a wave of black artistic and intellectual achievement. Writers like Langston Hughes, musicians like Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong, and activists like W.E.B. Du Bois helped shape a new cultural identity. Jazz and blues, once limited to the South, became national sensations. Then came World War II, and with it, the Second Great Migration. This time, Over 5 million African Americans moved, not only to northern cities, but also to the West Coast, settling in places like Los Angeles, Oakland, and Seattle. World War II created an even greater demand for labor. Factories producing weapons, aircraft, and other wartime supplies needed workers, and many African Americans found jobs in these industries. However, racial tensions also increased. In some cities, white workers protested against black employment, leading to violent clashes. The most infamous example was the Detroit Race Riot of 1943, where conflicts between black and white residents escalated into deadly violence. Huge problem. In the North and West, banks and real estate agents used a policy called redlining, which prevented black families from buying homes in white neighborhoods. Many black Americans were forced into segregated housing projects with poor living conditions, while white suburbs flourished. Even with these obstacles, the Second Great Migration helped fuel the civil rights movement. Many of the movement's key figures, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and Rosa Parks, came from families who had migrated. As black communities in northern and western cities grew, so did their political power. Organizations like the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, gained influence, and black voters played a crucial role in elections. By 1970, the Great Migration had permanently reshaped the racial demographics of the United States. Cities that once had small black populations became major cultural and political centers. The impact of this migration is still visible today in many ways. Black communities in cities like Chicago, Detroit, and Atlanta became powerful voting blocs. Over time, this led to the election of black mayors, congresspeople, and other leaders. The migration contributed to the spread of jazz, blues, and later hip-hop, all of which have had a lasting impact on global music and culture. While black Americans found better opportunities in the North and West, systemic racism continued. Many were still limited to low-paying jobs and faced housing discrimination, challenges that persist today. Without the Great Migration, the civil rights movement might not have had the same momentum. The migration helped create a new black middle class and strengthened activism against segregation and discrimination. Even today, the legacy of the Great Migration is seen in the political, economic, and cultural landscape of the United States. It was more than just a movement of people. It was a movement that transformed history. Did Marie Antoinette really say, "Let them eat cake," or is it one of the greatest misunderstandings in history? Are you ready to explore the life of one of France's most controversial queens? Sent to France as a bride from Austria at a very young age, Marie Antoinette became the queen of a country she barely knew. While she lived in luxury and grandeur within the palace, the people outside were suffering from hunger. But was Marie Antoinette truly this cruel, or have the events been exaggerated? To find out the truth, let's dive deep into her story from beginning to end. Marie Antoinette was born on November 2nd, 1755, in Austria. She was the youngest daughter of Empress Maria Theresa and Emperor Francis I of the Holy Roman Empire. As a member of the royal family, she grew up in wealth and splendor, but this privileged life would soon shape her destiny as the Queen of France. At the age of 14, she was sent to France to marry Louis Auguste, the Dauphin of France, as part of a political alliance. Barely a teenager, she left her homeland to join a royal family she had never met and became known as Marie Antoinette in her new country. Yet this marriage wasn't merely a union of two young people. It was a strategic alliance meant to solidify the power of two great dynasties, the Habsburgs and the Bourbons. From the moment she set foot in the Palace of Versailles, Marie Antoinette attracted attention. Her beauty, elegance, and charm made her the center of attention at court. However, the people of France viewed her with suspicion, seeing her as the foreign princess. They never fully accepted her as one of their own, scrutinizing her every move. Her early years at court were quite challenging. Her husband, Louis Auguste, later King Louis XVI, was introverted and shy. In the first years of their marriage, they were childless, leading to rumors about Marie Antoinette among the public. Some even claimed that she was failing in her duties as queen because she couldn't provide an heir. During this difficult period, Marie Antoinette turned to entertainment and luxury to escape the dullness of court life and to cope with her loneliness. She organized lavish balls at Versailles, wore the most expensive dresses, and adorned herself with extravagant jewelry. She was also known for her love of gambling and extravagant spending, but her luxurious lifestyle coincided with a period of severe economic crisis in France. As the people suffered under high taxes and famine, the Queen's extravagant spending angered the public. They began to call her Madame Deficit, blaming her for the nation's financial troubles. One of the most debated controversies about her is the famous quote, "Let them eat cake." It was said that when the people of France were starving and couldn't afford bread, Marie Antoinette heartlessly remarked, "Let them eat cake." But historians agree that she never actually said this. In fact, the phrase had been attributed to another queen years before her. Still, the story stuck, further cementing her image as an out-of-touch and heartless monarch. By 1789, the French Revolution had erupted, and Marie Antoinette became the symbol of all that was wrong with the monarchy. Revolutionaries saw the royal family as enemies and blamed their luxurious lifestyle for the nation's suffering. Despite the growing danger, Marie Antoinette tried to remain strong. But the revolutionaries placed the royal family under house arrest at the Tuileries Palace. Multiple escape plans were devised, but all failed. During an escape attempt to Varennes, they were captured, leading the public to see them as traitors. After the failed escape, the royal family became prisoners in their own country. Marie Antoinette was separated from her children and held in solitary confinement. In 1793, she was put on trial, accused of treason against the nation. During the trial, she maintained her composure and dignity, but the verdict was predetermined. She was sentenced to death by guillotine. On October 16th, 1793, amidst the jeers of the Parisian crowds, she was led to the guillotine. Even in her final moments, she stood tall, maintaining her royal grace and pride. Marie Antoinette's death symbolized the fall of the French monarchy and marked one of the most dramatic moments in the history of the Revolution. Yet the debate over her legacy continued long after her death. Was she truly the heartless queen she was portrayed to be, or was she the victim of political propaganda? Some argue that she was made a scapegoat for the revolution. Marie Antoinette's story isn't just a tale of France's past, but one of the most dramatic and tragic narratives in world history. Her life stands as a powerful example of grandeur and downfall. But what do you think? Was Marie Antoinette really so disconnected from her people, or were the events exaggerated? Did history judge her fairly, or was she just a victim of her time? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more historical stories like this one. Imagine a plague so deadly that it not only destroys people, but also brings empires to their knees. Streets filled with corpses, a city drowning in fear, leaders helpless against an invisible enemy. The plague of Justinian was one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. But was it merely a disease, or was it a turning point that reshaped the course of civilization? Could this catastrophe have been the reason for the fall of the Roman Empire? Keep watching to uncover the truth behind this mysterious plague. Everything began in 541 AD in the bustling port city of Pelusium in Egypt. It started quietly, with a few people falling ill. No one suspected that this would soon become one of the deadliest pandemics the world had ever seen. But as merchant ships sailed from Egypt to other parts of the Mediterranean, they unknowingly carried with them more than just goods. They carried death. Hidden within the cargo were rats, and on these rats were fleas infected with Yersinia pestis, the bacterium responsible for the bubonic plague. The disease spread rapidly. From Egypt to Alexandria, then to Palestine and Syria, it followed the trade routes like a shadow of death. When it finally reached the capital of the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople, the city was utterly unprepared for the devastation it would face. People began to die at an alarming rate, thousands each day. Streets were lined with corpses, and the air was thick with the smell of death. How did it spread so fast? The dense population of Constantinople made it the perfect breeding ground for the plague. People lived in close quarters, and hygiene standards were low. As the infected fleas jumped from rats to humans, the disease spread like wildfire. The symptoms were terrifying: high fever, chills, headaches, muscle pain, and most notably, swollen and painful lymph nodes called buboes. Those infected died within days, often in excruciating pain. Was there any hope for a cure? Doctors at the time were baffled. With limited medical knowledge, they tried all sorts of remedies: herbal concoctions, bloodletting, and even prayers. None of it worked. People began to believe that the plague was divine punishment, a wrath from God for their sins. Churches were packed with frightened citizens praying for salvation, while others turned to superstition and magic to ward off the disease. Panic and chaos took over. The plague showed no mercy. It did not distinguish between rich and poor, young or old, rulers or commoners. Even Emperor Justinian himself fell ill, but miraculously survived. Yet his survival was no relief to his crumbling empire. With up to 50% of Constantinople's population dead, the city was paralyzed. There weren't enough people to bury the dead, leading to corpses piling up in the streets and mass graves being dug in desperation. The economy collapsed as trade halted, agricultural production plummeted, and labor shortages crippled every industry. Emperor Justinian was a man of vision. He dreamed of restoring the glory of the Roman Empire, reclaiming lost territories, and establishing a powerful legacy. But the plague shattered his ambitions. His armies were devastated by the disease, bringing military campaigns to a halt. The financial burden of the pandemic drained the empire's treasury. Famine followed as agricultural lands lay abandoned. The empire was brought to its knees, not by a foreign enemy, but by an invisible killer. In the midst of all this chaos, people were searching for answers. Why was this happening? Who was to blame? As fear and desperation grew, so did suspicion and prejudice. Some believed that foreigners or religious minorities were responsible for spreading the disease. This led to social unrest, violence, and persecution. Blame games only deepened the fractures within society, making recovery even more difficult. Religious leaders were at a loss. Was this a punishment from God? Many believed it was, leading to mass repentance movements. People confessed their sins, performed acts of penance, and engaged in fervent prayer rituals, hoping to appease an angry deity. The church's influence grew as people looked to religion for salvation, yet the plague continued its deadly march, sparing no one. Was faith enough to save them? The plague of Justinian did not just kill people, it reshaped history. It weakened the Byzantine Empire, leaving it vulnerable to invasions from the Persians and later the Arabs. It disrupted trade networks, leading to economic stagnation that lasted for decades. Cities fell into decay, and cultural progress slowed. Some historians even argue that this plague contributed to the eventual fall of the Roman Empire. It was a turning point that changed the world forever. The social impact was just as severe. Families were torn apart, communities shattered, and the fabric of society was forever altered. The fear of contagion created a culture of isolation, with people abandoning even their closest relatives out of fear. This breakdown of social bonds led to increased crime rates and a loss of moral order. The once thriving cosmopolitan city of Constantinople became a shadow of its former self. Could such a catastrophe happen again? Modern science has made significant advancements, but history has a way of repeating itself. Pandemics are not just about disease, they expose the strengths and weaknesses of societies, economies, and governments. What lessons can we learn from the plague of Justinian? Could our world handle a similar disaster today? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, and make sure to subscribe for more content. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to take a deep dive into one of the most important Supreme Court cases in American history. Brown v. Board of Education. This case didn't just change the legal landscape of the United States, it fundamentally transformed society and became a cornerstone of the civil rights movement. So grab a snack, get comfortable, and let's explore this landmark case in detail. To truly understand Brown versus Board of Education, we need to set the stage. In the 1950s, the United States was a nation deeply divided by race. Segregation was the law of the land in many states, particularly in the South. This system of racial separation, often referred to as Jim Crow, dictated almost every aspect of public life. African Americans were forced to use separate restrooms, water fountains, and waiting rooms. They were relegated to the back of buses and denied service in many restaurants and hotels. And perhaps most damaging of all, they were subjected to segregated schools. The legal justification for this system came from the 1896 Supreme Court case, Plessy v. Ferguson-Starr. In that case, the court upheld a Louisiana law requiring segregated railroad cars, ruling that separate but equal facilities were constitutional. The idea was that as long as the facilities provided to black and white people were equal in quality, segregation itself was not a violation of the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. But in reality, separate but equal was a myth. Facilities for African Americans were almost always inferior, and nowhere was this more evident than in public education. By the mid-20th century, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, had been fighting racial injustice for decades. Under the leadership of figures like Thurgood Marshall, who would later become the first African-American Supreme Court justice, the NAACP developed a legal strategy to challenge segregation in schools. They knew that overturning Plessy v. Ferguson would be an uphill battle, so they decided to focus on education, arguing that segregated schools were inherently unequal and violated the 14th Amendment. The NAACP brought together several lawsuits from different states, all challenging segregation in public schools. These cases were consolidated under the name Brown versus Board of Education, with the lead case coming from Topeka, Kansas. The plaintiff was Oliver Brown, an African-American father whose daughter, Linda Brown, had been denied admission to an all-white elementary school near their home. Instead, Linda had to travel a long distance to attend an all-black school. Oliver Brown and other parents decided to take a stand, and with the NAACP's help, they filed a lawsuit against the Topeka Board of Education. The case made its way through the federal courts, with the NAACP arguing that segregation in public schools violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. They presented evidence showing that segregated schools were not only unequal in terms of resources, but also caused psychological harm to African American children. One of the key pieces of evidence came from the Eunice-Doll test, a study conducted by psychologists Kenneth and Mamie Clark. The study showed that African American children often preferred white dolls over black ones, associating the white dolls with positive traits, and the black dolls with negative ones. This, the NAACP argued, demonstrated the damaging effects of segregation on children's self-esteem. The case reached the Supreme Court in 1952, and it was clear from the beginning that this would be a monumental decision. The court heard arguments twice, once in 1952 and again in 1953, before finally issuing its ruling on May 17, 1954. Chief Justice Earl Warren, who had recently been appointed to the court, wrote the unanimous opinion. In a landmark decision, the court declared that separate educational facilities are inherently unequal and that segregation in public schools violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. This decision effectively overturned Plessy v. Ferguson and marked the beginning of the end for legalized segregation in the United States. While the Brown decision was a monumental victory for the civil rights movement, it didn't immediately lead to widespread desegregation. Many states, particularly in the South, resisted the ruling. Some even went so far as to shut down public schools rather than integrate them. In 1955, the Supreme Court issued a follow-up ruling, often referred to as Brown II, which ordered schools to desegregate with all deliberate speed. Unfortunately, this vague wording allowed many states to delay implementation for years. The resistance to desegregation was fierce. In 1957, for example, Little Rock, 9, a group of African American students were famously blocked from entering Little Rock Central High School in Arkansas by the National Guard. It took an order from President Dwight D. Eisenhower and the deployment of federal troops to ensure that the students could attend the school. This was just one of many examples of the challenges faced in the years following the Brown decision. Although the Brown decision specifically addressed segregation in public schools, its impact extended far beyond education. The case served as a catalyst for the broader civil rights movement, inspiring activists to challenge segregation in other areas of public life. It also paved the way for landmark legislation, such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Voting Rights Act of 1965, which further dismantled the legal framework of segregation and discrimination. The case also had a profound psychological impact. For many African Americans, the Brown decision was a symbol of hope and a reminder that change was possible. It showed that the legal system could be used as a tool for justice and equality, even in the face of deeply entrenched racism. Today, Brown v. Board of Education is remembered as one of the most important Supreme Court decisions in U.S. history. It marked a turning point in the fight for racial equality and set the stage for the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s. But the legacy of Brown is also a reminder that progress is often slow and hard-fought. While the decision ended legal segregation in schools, it didn't erase the deep-rooted inequalities that persist in American society. In many ways, the promise of Brown remains unfulfilled. Schools in the United States are still highly segregated, largely due to residential segregation and unequal funding. African American students are more likely to attend underfunded schools with fewer resources, perpetuating the cycle of inequality. This raises important questions about the ongoing struggle for educational equity and the role of the legal system in addressing these issues. So, why does Brown v. Board of Education still matter today? Because it reminds us of the power of the law to bring about social change. It shows how ordinary people, like Oliver Brown and his daughter Linda, can stand up against injustice and make a difference. But it also reminds us that progress doesn't happen overnight. It takes courage, persistence, and a commitment to equality. The story of Brown is also a call to action. It challenges us to continue the work of those who fought for civil rights and to address the inequalities that still exist in our society. Whether it's advocating for better funding for schools, fighting against discriminatory policies, or simply educating ourselves and others about the history of racial injustice, there's still so much work to be done. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit that like button, leave a comment, and share it with others. Make sure to subscribe for more content like this, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. The partition of India in 1947 stands as one of the most significant and tumultuous events in modern history, marking the end of British colonial rule in the Indian subcontinent and the birth of two independent nations, India and Pakistan. This monumental event was not just a political division, but also a deeply emotional and traumatic experience for millions of people, reshaping the cultural, social, and geographical landscape of the region forever. The partition was driven by a complex interplay of political, religious, and social factors, and its consequences continue to reverberate across South Asia even today. To truly understand the partition, we must delve into its historical context, the key players involved, the events that led to the division, and the profound human suffering that accompanied it. The roots of the partition can be traced back to the long history of British colonialism in India. The British East India Company began establishing its presence in India in the early 17th century. And by the mid-19th century, the British Crown had taken direct control of the subcontinent. Over the years, the British implemented policies that often exacerbated existing tensions between India's diverse religious communities, particularly between Hindus and Muslims. The British policy of divide and rule sowed seeds of discord, creating a sense of competition and mistrust between the two communities. This strategy was not accidental. It was a deliberate attempt to weaken the growing Indian independence movement by pitting different groups against each other. By the early 20th century, the demand for independence from British rule had gained significant momentum. The Indian National Congress, INC, founded in 1885, emerged as the leading voice of the independence movement. Initially, the INC represented a broad spectrum of Indians, including Hindus, Muslims, and other religious groups. However, as the movement progressed, differences began to emerge, particularly between the Hindu majority leadership of the INC and the Muslim minority, which felt increasingly marginalized. This growing divide led to the formation of the All India Muslim League in 1906, a political party dedicated to protecting the rights and interests of Muslims in India. The idea of a separate Muslim state began to take shape in the 1930s, largely due to the efforts of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the leader of the Muslim League. Jinnah, who was initially a member of the INC and a staunch advocate for Hindu-Muslim unity, became disillusioned with the Congress's leadership, which he believed was not adequately addressing the concerns of Muslims. Jinnah argued that Muslims and Hindus were distinct nations with their own customs, traditions, and ways of life, and therefore they could not coexist in a single state. This idea, known as the two-nation theory, became the foundation for the demand for Pakistan, a separate homeland for Muslims. The demand for Pakistan gained traction during the 1940s, particularly after the failure of the Cabinet Mission Plan in 1946, which had proposed a united India with a decentralized federal structure. The Muslim League rejected the plan, insisting on the creation of Pakistan. Meanwhile, the INC, under the leadership of figures like Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, continued to advocate for a united India. The political deadlock between the two parties, combined with rising communal tensions, led to widespread violence between Hindus and Muslims, particularly in regions like Bengal and Punjab. The situation reached a boiling point in 1947, when the British government, exhausted by World War II and facing increasing pressure from the Indian independence movement, decided to withdraw from India. The last Viceroy of India, Lord Louis Mountbatten, was tasked with overseeing the transition to independence. Mountbatten initially hoped to preserve a united India, but soon realized that the political and communal divisions were too deep to overcome. On June 3, 1947, he announced the Partition Plan, which proposed the creation of two independent dominions, India and Pakistan. The plan was accepted by both the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League, and the date for independence was set for August 15, 1947. The partition was not just a political division, it was also a geographical one. The British tasked Sir Cyril Radcliffe, a lawyer with no prior knowledge of India, with drawing the boundaries between the two new nations. Radcliffe's task was incredibly challenging, as he had to divide regions with mixed populations of Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs. The boundaries he drew, known as the Radcliffe Line, were announced just 2 days after independence, leading to widespread confusion and chaos. The division was particularly brutal in the provinces of Punjab and Bengal, which were split between India and Pakistan. Millions of people found themselves on the wrong side of the border, leading to one of the largest and most violent migrations in human history. The human cost of the partition was staggering. As the boundaries were announced, communal violence erupted on an unprecedented scale. Hindus and Sikhs in Pakistan fled to India, while Muslims in India fled to Pakistan. Trains carrying refugees were attacked, villages were burned, and families were torn apart. Women were particularly vulnerable, with many being abducted, raped, or killed. Estimates suggest that between 200,000 and 2 million people lost their lives during the partition, and around 14 million were displaced. The trauma of the partition left deep scars on the collective memory of both nations, and its legacy continues to shape the relationship between India and Pakistan to this day. The partition also had significant political and economic consequences. The division of assets between India and Pakistan was a contentious issue, with disputes over everything from military equipment to financial reserves. The princely states, which were nominally independent under British rule, were given the choice to join either India or Pakistan. Most princely states acceded to one of the two nations, but the decision of Jammu and Kashmir, a predominantly Muslim region with a Hindu ruler, led to a protracted conflict that remains unresolved. The partition also disrupted trade and economic ties, leading to economic instability in both countries. Despite the immense challenges, both India and Pakistan embarked on the journey of nation-building. India adopted a democratic constitution in 1950, becoming a secular republic with a commitment to pluralism and diversity. Pakistan, on the other hand, struggled with political instability and eventually split into two nations in 1971, when East Pakistan became the independent country of Bangladesh. The partition also had a profound impact on the cultural and social fabric of the region. The migration of millions of people led to the exchange of languages, traditions, and cuisines, enriching the cultural heritage of both nations. However, the wounds of the partition have yet to fully heal, and the relationship between India and Pakistan remains fraught with tension and conflict. The partition of India in 1947 is a stark reminder of the complexities and consequences of colonialism, nationalism, and identity politics. It is a story of hope and despair, of freedom and loss, and of the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable adversity. As we reflect on this pivotal moment in history, it is essential to remember the lessons of the past and strive for a future marked by peace, understanding, and cooperation. If you found this exploration of the partition insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into history's most defining moments. Let's continue to learn from the past to build a better future together. Throughout history, many leaders have attempted to achieve the impossible by pushing boundaries. However, none were as bold and creative as the legendary Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca. In 218 BC, Hannibal launched a major campaign against the Roman Empire, and the most striking part of this campaign was his plan to cross the Alps and reach Italy. This move was not just a military strategy, but also an epic tale of human ingenuity, determination, and the relentless pursuit of victory. So, who was Hannibal? Why did he choose to cross the Alps? And how did this arduous journey unfold? Let's explore the answers to these questions by delving into one of history's most daring military strategies. Hannibal Barca was born in 247 BC in Carthage, a powerful city-state located in modern-day Tunisia. His father, Hamilcar Barca, was a prominent general who had fought against Rome in the First Punic War, 264 to 241 BC. From a young age, Hannibal was immersed in the art of war and politics. His father, who harbored a deep resentment toward Rome after Carthage's defeat in the First Punic War, made Hannibal swear an oath of eternal enmity against Rome. This oath would shape Hannibal's destiny and fuel his lifelong quest to defeat Rome. Hannibal's early years were spent in military training and education. He accompanied his father on campaigns in Spain, where Carthage was expanding its influence. After Hamilcar's death, Hannibal's brother-in-law, Hasdrubal the Fair, took command of the Carthaginian forces in Spain. Under Hasdrubal's leadership, Hannibal continued to hone his skills as a military commander. When Hasdrubal was assassinated in 221 BC, the Carthaginian army unanimously chose Hannibal as their new leader. At just 26 years old, Hannibal was now in charge of one of the most powerful armies in the ancient world. The Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BC, was a conflict between Carthage and Rome, two of the most powerful states in the ancient Mediterranean. The war was sparked by tensions over territorial expansion, particularly in Spain. Hannibal, determined to avenge Carthage's defeat in the First Punic War, saw an opportunity to strike at Rome's heart. However, Rome's dominance at sea made a direct naval assault risky. Instead, Hannibal devised a bold plan. He would lead his army over the Alps and attack Rome from the north, a move that would catch the Romans completely off guard. Crossing the Alps was no small feat. The mountain range, with its towering peaks, treacherous passes, and unpredictable weather, was considered nearly impassable for a large army. Yet Hannibal saw it as the only way to achieve his goal. By taking this route, he could bypass Rome's naval defenses and launch a surprise attack on the Italian peninsula. The psychological impact of such a move would be immense, as it would demonstrate Carthage's resolve and strike fear into the hearts of the Romans. Hannibal's army consisted of approximately 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants. The inclusion of elephants was both a strategic and psychological tactic. Elephants were formidable weapons on the battlefield, capable of trampling enemy soldiers and causing chaos. However, their presence also symbolized Carthage's exotic power and military might. In the spring of 218 BC, Hannibal set out from New Carthage, modern-day Cartagena, Spain, with his army. The journey to the Alps was long and arduous, covering over 1,500 kilometers. Along the way, Hannibal faced numerous challenges, including hostile tribes, difficult terrain, and logistical issues. Despite these obstacles, Hannibal's leadership kept the army united and focused on their mission. As the army approached the Alps, the real test began. The mountains loomed ahead, their snow-capped peaks a stark reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. Hannibal's soldiers, many of whom had never seen mountains before, were filled with a mix of awe and dread. The general, however, remained resolute. He knew that crossing the Alps was the key to achieving his ultimate goal: the defeat of Rome. The crossing of the Alps is one of the most celebrated military achievements in history. Hannibal's army faced unimaginable hardships as they navigated the mountain passes. The steep slopes, narrow paths, and icy conditions made progress slow and dangerous. Soldiers slipped and fell, while pack animals struggled to carry their loads. The cold was relentless, and many men succumbed to frostbite and exhaustion. The elephants, though impressive, posed a unique challenge. Their large size and weight made it difficult for them to traverse the narrow mountain paths. Some historians believe that Hannibal used wooden platforms to help the elephants cross particularly treacherous sections. Others suggest that many elephants perished during the journey. Despite these difficulties, Hannibal's determination never wavered. He led by example, sharing in the hardships of his men and inspiring them to keep going. After weeks of grueling travel, Hannibal's army finally descended into the Po Valley in northern Italy. The journey had taken a heavy toll. According to some accounts, Hannibal lost nearly half of his men during the crossing. However, the survivors were battle-hardened and ready to face the Romans. Hannibal's arrival in Italy sent shockwaves through Rome. The Romans had never expected an enemy to cross the Alps, and Hannibal's presence on Italian soil was a psychological blow. Hannibal's campaign in Italy is a testament to his military genius. Over the next several years, he won a series of stunning victories against the Romans. At the Battle of Trebia, 218 BC, Hannibal used his superior tactics to defeat a larger Roman force. The following year, he ambushed and destroyed a Roman army at the Battle of Lake Trasimene. However, his greatest triumph came at the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC. At Cannae, Hannibal faced a Roman army nearly twice the size of his own. Despite being outnumbered, Hannibal devised a brilliant strategy. He arranged his forces in a crescent shape, allowing the Romans to push forward into a trap. As the Roman infantry advanced, Hannibal's cavalry encircled them from the flanks and rear. The result was a crushing defeat for Rome, with tens of thousands of Roman soldiers killed or captured. Cannae is still studied today as a masterpiece of military tactics. Despite his victories, Hannibal was unable to deliver a decisive blow to Rome. The Romans, under the leadership of Fabius Maximus, adopted a strategy of attrition, avoiding direct confrontation with Hannibal's army. Meanwhile, Rome's vast resources allowed it to raise new armies and continue the fight. Hannibal, cut off from reinforcements and supplies, found it increasingly difficult to sustain his campaign. In 203 BC, Hannibal was recalled to Carthage to defend against a Roman invasion led by Scipio Africanus. The two generals met at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC. This time, the tables were turned. Scipio employed tactics similar to those Hannibal had used at Cannae, and the Carthaginians were decisively defeated. The Second Punic War ended with Carthage's surrender, and Hannibal's dream of defeating Rome was shattered. Although Hannibal ultimately failed to conquer Rome, his legacy endures as one of history's greatest military commanders. His daring crossing of the Alps, his innovative tactics, and his ability to inspire his men in the face of overwhelming odds have made him a symbol of courage and strategic brilliance. Hannibal's story reminds us that even the most impossible goals can be achieved through determination, ingenuity, and leadership. Hannibal's life after the war was marked by exile and intrigue. He served as a statesman in Carthage and later as a military advisor to various kingdoms. However, his enemies never forgot him. In 183 BC, pursued by the Romans, Hannibal took his own life rather than be captured. His final words, according to legend, were, "Let us relieve the Romans of their fear, since they think it too long to wait for the death of an old man." Hannibal's crossing of the Alps is more than just a historical event. It is a testament to the power of human will and the pursuit of greatness. His story teaches us that even the most daunting challenges can be overcome with courage, creativity, and determination. Hannibal's legacy continues to inspire leaders, strategists, and dreamers around the world. As we reflect on Hannibal's journey, we are reminded that history is not just a record of the past, but a source of timeless lessons. Whether in war, business, or personal endeavors, the principles of leadership, strategy, and resilience that Hannibal embodied remain as relevant today as they were over 2,000 years ago. Welcome to InfoSphere. Today, we're taking you on an exciting journey through the depths of American history. This video features 10 fun and educational questions. Let's see how well you can do in this historical challenge. Don't forget to tally up your correct answers at the end of the video and keep the score for yourself. Who discovered the Americas? A. Christopher Columbus. From which state was Abraham Lincoln elected? A. Illinois. What event led to the United States entering World War II? Pearl Harbor attack. What was the economic crisis that began in 1929 called? C. The Great Depression. When did the Apollo 11 mission land on the moon? (1969). When was John F. Kennedy assassinated? (1963). Which two buildings were destroyed in the 9/11 attacks? C. The World Trade Center. What is the longest river in the United States? Missouri River. What is the highest mountain in the United States? Denali. What is the oldest university in the United States? B. Harvard University. Congratulations! You've successfully completed all 10 questions. How many did you get right? Don't forget to share your score in the comments. If you enjoyed this content, make sure to subscribe and share the video. See you in the next one. The Whiskey War, also known as the Whiskey Islands Dispute, is one of the world's most unique and long-standing territorial disputes. It involves a small, uninhabited area between Greenland, an autonomous territory of Denmark, and Canada. Despite its name, the dispute is not about whiskey itself, but rather over sovereignty of two tiny, barren islands in the Nares Strait. Let's explore how this unusual conflict began and evolved. What are your thoughts on territorial disputes? Let us know in the comments. In the early 1900s, Greenland and Canada were both territories with undefined boundaries. While Greenland was controlled by Denmark, Canada was part of the British Empire, and later became an independent country. The dispute dates back to 1900, when the Danish government started making claims over the area near the Nares Strait. At the time, the islands and rocks in the region were poorly charted, and their sovereignty was unclear. Have you ever heard of a territorial dispute like this? Share your thoughts with us. The treaty signed in the 1930s between Denmark and Canada did not explicitly address the sovereignty of the islands in the Nares Strait, leaving the issue unresolved for many years. By 1951, Denmark and Canada were both asserting control over the islands. The Canadians argued that the islands belonged to Canada, while the Danes claimed them for Greenland. For several decades, there was little tangible conflict, but tensions simmered just below the surface. As the issue remained unresolved, both countries focused on other matters until the 1980s, when the conflict resurfaced. This led to the quirky phase of the Whiskey War. Would you side with Canada or Denmark in this unique territorial debate? Let us know in the comments. In the late 1980s, the dispute became known as the Whiskey War, a term that arose because of the humorous and light-hearted way in which both countries responded to the territorial claims. Danish and Canadian officials would regularly place bottles of alcohol, whiskey, and schnapps on Hans Island as a symbolic gesture of sovereignty. While this playful interaction generated media interest, it highlighted the underlying reality that the sovereignty issue had not been resolved. The Whiskey War became a quirky piece of international diplomacy. What do you think of using humor to resolve serious disputes? Comment below with your opinion. The 1990s and 2000s saw both Canada and Denmark make serious efforts to resolve the dispute diplomatically. The countries met several times and initiated talks aimed at settling the issue peacefully. However, despite these efforts, no formal agreement was reached. The delay in resolution was mainly due to other international priorities for both countries, including Arctic exploration and climate change concerns. Do you think that the issue was blown out of proportion, or should it have been resolved sooner? Share your thoughts with us. The situation began to change in the 2000s as the global focus on the Arctic increased due to climate change, resource exploration, and emerging shipping routes. Both Canada and Denmark recognized the importance of addressing the dispute to foster cooperation in the region. In 2005, they created a joint task force aimed at settling the issue. By 2022, Canada and Denmark reached an agreement to share the sovereignty of Hans Island, effectively ending the Whiskey War. Do you think that this kind of territorial dispute could have been resolved without the use of humor? Let us know your opinion in the comments. The Whiskey War, although initially a light-hearted territorial dispute, became a symbol of successful international diplomacy. Over the years, it showed how humor, patience, and mutual respect could be employed to resolve even the most trivial-seeming conflicts. Today, the two countries have agreed to jointly manage Hans Island, and the Whiskey War is a thing of the past. Do you think this resolution sets an example for other international disputes? Share your thoughts below. Welcome to InfoSphere. Today, we'll explore the remarkable and often overlooked story of Mileva Maric, a pioneering physicist, mathematician, and Albert Einstein's first wife. Her contributions to science and her untold struggles make her a fascinating figure in history. Join us as we uncover her journey and examine her potential impact on some of the most groundbreaking discoveries in physics. Mileva Maric was born on December 19, 1875, in Titel, in what is now Serbia. She grew up in a time when educational opportunities for women were scarce, especially in science. Yet her brilliance and determination broke through societal barriers. From a young age, Mileva displayed exceptional talent in mathematics and science. She became one of the first women to study physics and mathematics at Zurich Polytechnic, a prestigious institution where she later met Albert Einstein. But her story extends far beyond their meeting and marriage. Mileva Maric's educational journey was extraordinary. She was the only woman in her physics and mathematics program at Zurich Polytechnic in 1896, a remarkable achievement considering the rigid gender norms of the time. Her academic excellence made her stand out, but her journey was not without challenges. Despite being a brilliant student, Mileva faced institutional and societal discrimination. Nonetheless, she persevered, showing a deep passion for theoretical physics, which became a shared interest between her and Einstein. Their bond was intellectual as well as personal. Mileva and Albert Einstein's partnership has been a topic of much debate. The two were not only romantic partners, but also collaborators. Letters exchanged between them during their courtship reveal discussions of scientific theories and equations. Einstein often referred to their work as our research, hinting at Mileva's involvement in his early scientific endeavors. While it is unclear how much she contributed to Einstein's theories, some historians believe that her mathematical skills played a crucial role in shaping his early work, including the theory of special relativity. Unfortunately, her contributions, if any, were overshadowed by the societal norms of the time, which rarely credited women for intellectual achievements. Mileva and Albert married in 1903 and had 3 children: Liesel, Hans Albert, and Eduard. Their marriage was marked by both collaboration and strain. As Einstein's career soared, Mileva's role shifted to managing the household and caring for their children, leaving little time for her own academic pursuits. Their first child, Liesel, likely passed away young, adding to Mileva's emotional burden. Their second son, Eduard, later struggled with schizophrenia, which Mileva managed almost entirely on her own after their divorce in 1919. Mileva's marriage to Einstein ended on a sour note. The divorce settlement included a controversial clause. Einstein agreed to give Mileva the Nobel Prize money he anticipated winning. This financial arrangement has been interpreted in various ways, with some suggesting it was compensation for her unacknowledged contributions to his work. After the divorce, Mileva lived modestly, dedicating her life to caring for her son, Eduard. Her scientific ambitions were left behind, a testament to the sacrifices she made for her family. The extent of Mileva Marich's contributions to Einstein's work remains a subject of intense debate among historians. Some argue that her involvement in their early collaborative efforts was significant, citing Einstein's letters and their shared passion for theoretical physics. Others contend that the evidence is inconclusive and that Mileva's role has been romanticized. Regardless of the specifics, her story highlights the broader issue of women's erasure from scientific history. Mileva's intellect and potential were undeniable, and her story forces us to question how many other women's contributions have been overlooked. In recent years, Mileva Maric has gained recognition as a symbol of women's struggles in science. Her life story is a reminder of the systemic barriers women faced, and continue to face, in academia and other fields. Institutions and organizations now honor her memory by promoting gender equity in science and technology. Her name stands as a beacon for aspiring female scientists, reminding them that their contributions matter, even if history has yet to catch up. What if I told you that one of history's greatest rulers not only reshaped entire civilizations, but also might have played a role in altering the global climate? Genghis Khan's story is far from ordinary. This legendary figure, who rose from nothing, united vast nomadic tribes, and went on to build the largest contiguous empire the world has ever seen, is often remembered for his brutal conquests. But there's more to his legacy than meets the eye. In this video, we'll delve into the extraordinary life of Genghis Khan, from his rise to power, the wars he waged, to the environmental impacts of his reign. Genghis Khan is one of the most important and influential leaders in history, leaving a profound impact on the world. Born as Temujin, this Mongol ruler made his mark not only through his military victories, but also with his lasting environmental and global effects. Born in 1162, Genghis Khan grew up in harsh conditions, fought enemies, and united various tribes to form a great empire. However, his achievements are not only confined to the battlefield, but also to his lasting influence on the global climate. Genghis Khan's life was initially filled with hardships. His father Yesigey was killed when Temujin was a young child, and after his death Temujin's family struggled, being excluded by rival tribes. After his father's death, the family lived in great hardship. However, Temujin grew up in these difficult conditions and developed remarkable leadership skills. From a young age, his intelligence, charisma, and combat skills earned him recognition among the surrounding tribes. An important factor in Temujin's rise was his ability to forge alliances and his network of loyal friends. Over time, by making agreements with former enemies and uniting other tribes, he proclaimed himself the leader of the Mongols. In 1206, Temujin united the Mongol tribes and declared himself Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler, establishing a vast military empire. Genghis Khan's military prowess made him one of the greatest warriors in history. Under his leadership, the Mongol army became disciplined, fast-moving, and tactically superior. Genghis Khan's battle strategies not only led to great victories, but also caused psychological collapse in his enemies. The Mongols were known for their archery and speed, but they also used psychological warfare tactics very effectively. Deceiving enemies and launching surprise attacks were some of Genghis Khan's hallmark strategies. Genghis Khan did not rely only on brute force, but also emphasized strategic intelligence and disciplined military organization. Mongol soldiers sent reconnaissance teams to learn about enemy strategies, enabling them to catch their opponents off guard. These tactics earned Genghis Khan numerous victories and helped solidify his reputation as a brilliant tactician. Additionally, his cruelty towards enemies spread fear among them. The Mongol army punished entire populations with brutal massacres, leaving little mercy for those who resisted. When Genghis Khan began his conquests, his goal was not only to rule over Mongolia, but also to establish dominance across vast lands in Asia and Europe. His first major campaign was against the Jin Empire in northern China. His conquests in northern China allowed him to rapidly expand his empire. Later, Genghis Khan defeated the Khwarezmian Empire in Central Asia, destroying major cities like Bukhara and Samarkand. His campaign against the Khwarezmian Empire, in particular, showcased his brutality. The Khwarezmian Emperor had sent ambassadors to Genghis Khan, but they were executed. In response, Genghis Khan invaded the region with a massive army and carried out large-scale massacres. He obliterated cities and killed entire populations. This ruthlessness further cemented his reputation and earned him the title the Bloody Khan. Genghis Khan's conquests spanned from Asia to Europe. As he moved westward, the Mongols not only achieved military victories, but also facilitated a bridge between the West and the East, encouraging the exchange of trade and culture. The expansion of the Mongol Empire revitalized the Silk Road, fostering greater cultural interaction between distant civilizations. After Genghis Khan's death, his empire left behind a massive legacy. However, his legacy is not limited to military conquests. He also enacted many legal and social reforms. Under his rule, the Mongol Empire established systems that promoted the rule of law and protected its people. Furthermore, Genghis Khan showed tolerance to various ethnic and religious groups in the territories he conquered, encouraging cultural diversity. This allowed his empire to maintain harmony among different peoples. At the same time, Genghis Khan's reign led to significant environmental changes. The Mongols, in their conquests, destroyed vast forests and opened up large areas for agriculture. This environmental degradation left lasting impacts on the global climate. The policies of Genghis Khan's regime, such as abandoned farmland, regrowing forests, and mass migrations, could have contributed to the acceleration of the Little Ice Age. It is estimated that around 40 million people lost their lives during Genghis Khan's military campaigns and massacres, particularly in his campaign against the Khwarezmian Empire. Nearly 1 million people are thought to have died, and many cities were annihilated. These massive slaughterings were some of the major factors in cementing Genghis Khan's infamy. The Roman legions were more than just military units. They were the backbone of Rome's success, the key to its dominance and expansion over centuries. At the heart of Roman warfare were the soldiers, highly trained professionals who operated with unparalleled discipline, strategic planning, and tactical flexibility. Their legacy shaped not only the Roman Empire, but also modern military systems. This extensive history of Roman legions is a vast topic that spans their origins, evolution, structure, training, tactics, and equipment. The Roman legions trace their origins to the early days of the Roman Republic. Rome was initially a small city-state, surrounded by other Italian tribes, with no standing army. The early Roman military consisted mainly of citizen soldiers who were required to serve in the military during times of war. These soldiers were often landowners, and their ability to serve was tied to their wealth. This army was based on the phalanx formation, a tightly packed arrangement of soldiers with spears, borrowed from the Greek military practices. However, the phalanx was limited in its effectiveness, especially against enemies who utilized more fluid and mobile tactics. Rome's success in early wars, including those with the Samnites and Etruscans, revealed that the Roman army would need to evolve to adapt to different forms of warfare. It was during this time that the Romans began to experiment with different formations and military structures. One of the critical moments in the evolution of Roman military tactics occurred during the Samnite Wars, 343 to 290 BCE. The Samnites were a formidable mountain people who used guerrilla tactics, and the Romans quickly realized that their traditional phalanx formation would not work in the rugged terrain. This led to the development of the manipular system, a new way of organizing the army that would prove vital to Rome's success. The manipular system replaced the phalanx with smaller, more flexible units called maniples. A maniple was a smaller group of soldiers, about 120 men, compared to the larger units used in the phalanx. The maniples were arranged in 3 lines, with each line having a different role depending on the battle's situation. This allowed for greater flexibility and adaptability on the battlefield. In 107 BCE, Gaius Marius, a Roman general, introduced a series of reforms that would change the structure of the Roman military forever. These reforms allowed for the recruitment of the landless poor, making the military service available to a much broader section of Roman society. Previously, only Roman citizens who owned land were allowed to serve, but Marius opened the door to the plebeians, the landless poor, who were often the backbone of Roman infantry. This transformed the Roman army into a full-time professional force. Marius also introduced the concept of the soldiers' loyalty being to their commanders and the Roman state, rather than individual landowners. This change created a standing army that was committed to Roman expansion and conquest, giving rise to the modern idea of a professional soldier. Marius's reforms also changed the structure of the legions, making them more efficient and effective in combat. The Roman legion, at its peak, was an intricate and highly effective fighting force. A legion typically consisted of 5,000 to 6,000 men, though the size could vary depending on the period. The legion was divided into 10 cohorts, each with 480 to 600 soldiers. The cohort was the main tactical unit in battle and could be deployed independently or in coordination with other cohorts. Each cohort was further divided into 6 centuries, each led by a centurion. The centurions were the backbone of the Roman military and played a crucial role in maintaining discipline, ensuring that soldiers followed orders, and leading their men into battle. The smallest unit in the Roman military was the contubernium, a group of 8 soldiers who shared a tent and other responsibilities. The command structure of the Roman legion was complex, with officers at various levels. The highest-ranking officer in the legion was the legate, who was usually appointed by the Roman Senate or the emperor. Below the legate were the tribunes, who were often young men from noble families who served as senior officers. The centurions, as mentioned, were responsible for leading individual centuries and maintaining discipline among their soldiers. The Roman army's success was not just due to its structure, but also its rigorous training and discipline. Roman soldiers were put through a grueling training regimen designed to prepare them for the harsh realities of war. Training would begin as soon as recruits were enlisted and would continue throughout their service. Roman soldiers were trained in several areas, including physical fitness, combat skills, and the construction of military infrastructure. Soldiers would march for miles carrying heavy packs, often under the harshest conditions. They were trained to build camps, construct roads and fortifications, ensuring that they could maintain their position in enemy territory. Discipline was a key factor in the Roman army's success. Soldiers were expected to adhere to strict codes of behavior, and punishments for disobedience were severe. The Romans employed a number of methods to maintain discipline, including flogging and execution. The most feared punishment was decimation, where every 10th man in a unit was executed by his comrades as a form of collective punishment. The Roman soldier was equipped with a range of weapons and armor that made them highly effective on the battlefield. The primary weapon of a Roman legionary was the gladius, a short, double-edged sword designed for close combat. The gladius allowed soldiers to fight in tight formations, stabbing rather than slashing, which was more effective in the dense ranks of the Roman legions. Another key weapon used by Roman soldiers was the pilum, a type of throwing spear. The pilum was designed to break upon impact, making it difficult for enemies to throw it back. This gave the Romans a significant advantage in ranged combat. Soldiers also carried a large, rectangular shield called the scutum, which provided both defensive protection and the ability to form defensive formations, such as the testudo or tortoise formation. In addition to weapons, Roman soldiers wore armor that provided protection without sacrificing mobility. The lorica segmentata was a type of segmented armor made from metal strips, which allowed for flexibility while providing excellent protection. Roman soldiers also wore helmets, often with distinctive crests, and carried daggers for personal defense. The Roman legions were known for their battlefield tactics and strategic brilliance. One of the most famous formations used by the Romans was the testudo, or tortoise formation. In this formation, soldiers would align their shields in a tight, overlapping pattern to create a nearly impenetrable wall. This formation was particularly effective in defending against enemy missiles and projectiles. Roman soldiers were also trained to fight in smaller units, allowing them to adapt to the ever-changing dynamics of the battlefield. The legion was organized in such a way that it could respond quickly to threats from different directions. The use of cavalry, archers, and siege equipment further enhanced the Roman military's effectiveness. Roman generals also employed advanced tactics, such as feigned retreats, ambushes, and strategic use of terrain to gain the upper hand over their enemies. Roman armies were constantly evolving, learning from each campaign and incorporating new techniques and strategies. Despite their initial successes, the Roman legions eventually faced challenges that led to their decline. As the Roman Empire expanded, it became increasingly difficult to maintain control over its vast territory. The legions faced constant pressure from barbarian invasions, internal political instability, and economic struggles. The Roman army began to change during the later stages of the empire. The focus shifted from the professional Roman soldier to mercenaries and non-Roman recruits, which weakened the cohesion and discipline that had been the hallmark of the legions. In the 5th century CE, the fall of the Western Roman Empire marked the end of the Roman legions as a dominant military force. The story of the Romanov dynasty, spanning more than 3 centuries, is a tale of triumph, transformation, and tragedy. Their journey begins in the early 17th century, a time of great chaos and uncertainty in Russia, known as the Time of Troubles. To understand the significance of the Romanovs, we must first delve into the turbulent period that preceded their rise. The Time of Troubles, 1598 to 1613, was a period of political instability, famine, and foreign intervention that followed the death of Tsar Ivan IV, also known as Ivan the Terrible. Ivan's death left a power vacuum as his son and heir, Tsar Fyodor I, was unable to produce an heir. This lack of a clear successor plunged Russia into chaos. False claimants to the throne, known as the false Dimitris, emerged, supported by foreign powers like Poland and Sweden. The country descended into civil war, and the very existence of the Russian state was at risk. In 1613, the Romanov dynasty was established when Michael Romanov, a young nobleman, was elected Tsar by the Zemsky Sobor, a national assembly. Michael was just 16 years old at the time, and was chosen largely because of his familial ties to the old ruling dynasty and his reputation for being uncontroversial. His reign marked the beginning of a new era of stability and growth for Russia. Michael Romanov and his successors gradually consolidated power, laying the groundwork for an autocratic state. By the time of Michael's son, Tsar Alexis, Russia was expanding its territory and centralizing authority. Tsar Alexis's reign saw significant reforms, including the codification of Russian law in the 1649 Ulozhenie. However, his reign was also marked by internal strife, such as the schism in the Russian Orthodox Church, which led to the persecution of the Old Believers. One of the most transformative figures in Romanov history was Peter the Great. Born in 1672, Peter became Tsar in 1682 and began his sole rule in 1696 after the death of his half-brother, Ivan Vise. Peter's vision for Russia was nothing short of revolutionary. He sought to modernize the country by adopting Western European technologies, ideas, and practices. Peter the Great's reforms were sweeping and touched every aspect of Russian life. He reorganized the Russian military, creating a standing army and navy. He restructured the government, introducing a senate and a system of colleges to handle various state functions. Peter also mandated changes in Russian society, such as requiring the nobility to adopt Western dress and shave their beards. These reforms were controversial and faced resistance, but they fundamentally altered the trajectory of Russian history. One of Peter's most enduring legacies is the city of St. Petersburg, which he founded in 1703. Built on marshlands near the Baltic Sea, St. Petersburg was envisioned as Russia's window to Europe. Peter moved the capital from Moscow to St. Petersburg, making it the political and cultural center of the Russian Empire. The city remains a symbol of Peter's ambition and vision for Russia. Following Peter the Great, the Romanov dynasty continued to produce significant rulers who left their mark on Russian history. Catherine the Great, who ruled from 1762 to 1796, was another transformative figure. Born as Princess Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst, a small German principality, she married the future Emperor Peter III and later seized power after his deposition. Catherine the Great's reign is often referred to as the Golden Age of the Russian Empire. She expanded Russian territory, annexing Crimea, parts of Poland, and territories in the Caucasus. Catherine was also a patron of the arts and an advocate of Enlightenment ideas. She corresponded with prominent philosophers like Voltaire and Diderot, and sought to reform Russia's education system and government. However, her reign was not without challenges. Peasant uprisings, such as the Pugachev Rebellion, highlighted the deep inequalities in Russian society. The 19th century brought significant changes and challenges to the Romanov dynasty. Tsar Alexander I, who ruled from 1801 to 1825, is remembered for his role in defeating Napoleon. His reign was marked by a combination of liberal and conservative policies, reflecting the tension between reform and autocracy. Alexander's successor, Tsar Nicholas I, took a more conservative approach. His reign from 1825 to 1855 is often characterized as a period of repression and censorship. Nicholas the Mouse sought to maintain autocratic rule and suppress dissent, but his policies also contributed to Russia's stagnation relative to Western Europe. The Crimean War, 1853 to 1856, which Russia lost to an alliance of Western powers, exposed the weaknesses of the Russian state and military. In response to these challenges, Tsar Alexander II, who ruled from 1855 to 1881, implemented significant reforms. The most notable of these was the emancipation of the serfs in 1861. This landmark reform aimed to modernize Russian society and economy by ending the system of serfdom which had long tied peasants to the land. However, the emancipation did not fully address the inequalities faced by the peasantry, and unrest continued. Alexander II's assassination in 1881 by revolutionary terrorists underscored the growing tensions in Russian society. The last Romanov Tsar, Nicholas II, ascended the throne in 1894. His reign was marked by a series of crises that ultimately led to the fall of the Romanov dynasty. Nicholas II faced challenges from the start, including the Russo-Japanese War, 1904 to 1905, which ended in a humiliating defeat for Russia, and the 1905 Revolution, which forced him to grant limited constitutional reforms. World War I further strained the Russian Empire. Military defeats, economic hardship, and political unrest culminated in the February Revolution of 1917, which forced Nicholas II to abdicate. The Romanov family was placed under house arrest and later imprisoned by the Bolsheviks. On the night of July 16th to 17th, 1918, Nicholas, his wife Alexandra, and their 5 children were executed in Yekaterinburg. The Romanovs' tragic end marked the end of an era in Russian history. However, their legacy endures. The Romanov dynasty transformed Russia into a major global power, leaving a rich cultural and architectural heritage. The family story continues to captivate imaginations, inspiring countless books, films, and debates. In 2000, the Russian Orthodox Church canonized Nicholas II and his family as martyrs, acknowledging their suffering and the spiritual significance of their deaths. Today, the Romanovs are remembered not only as rulers, but also as symbols of Russia's complex and often tumultuous history. The Dust Bowl was a severe environmental disaster that occurred in the 1930s, primarily affecting the central United States, particularly the Great Plains. It was a period of intense dust storms, drought, and ecological collapse that dramatically altered the landscape, economy, and lives of millions of people. The Great Plains had long been a region where agriculture was difficult but feasible, relying on rainfall patterns and the resilience of its soil. However, by the early 20th century, farmers had begun to transform the region with new technologies, such as mechanized plows and deep-rooted crops. The over-farming of the land, paired with poor farming practices and the changing climate, set the stage for what would become one of the most devastating ecological disasters in American history. At the turn of the 20th century, new farming techniques allowed settlers to cultivate vast areas of land that had previously been considered unsuitable for agriculture. Mechanized equipment like tractors and plows made it easier to break the tough soil of the Great Plains. Farmers believed that the land was fertile and capable of supporting large-scale farming operations. However, this meant that farmers began to overplant crops like wheat, stripping the land of its natural grasses, which had previously held the soil in place. By the early 1930s, crop yields had significantly increased, and the demand for wheat was high due to global factors, including World War I. Farmers plowed up even more of the land, expanding their farms into areas that had once been barren or too fragile for cultivation. The situation began to change in the early 1930s when a severe drought set in across the region. The lack of rainfall caused the crops to fail, but the damage was compounded by the fact that the soil had been left vulnerable. With little to hold it in place, the wind began to carry the topsoil away. This resulted in frequent dust storms, as gusts of wind picked up the dry earth and carried it over great distances. The land had become barren, unable to produce crops, and the winds carried away the topsoil, further degrading the environment. The Dust Bowl reached its peak in the mid-1930s, with some of the worst storms occurring in 1934 and 1935. The storms were so intense that they could blot out the sun, turning day into night and covering homes, fields, and entire towns in thick layers of dust. The dust was often so thick that people were forced to stay indoors, and even then, they had to seal their windows and doors to prevent the dust from infiltrating their homes. The storms would sometimes last for days, and the air was filled with a choking dust that caused health problems for those exposed to it. The impact of the Dust Bowl was devastating. Farmers who had already struggled due to the Great Depression were now facing a crisis that ruined their crops and destroyed their livelihoods. Many were forced to abandon their farms and move west in search of work, with California being a popular destination. The movement of displaced people was so large that it became known as the Okie Migration, as many of the refugees came from Oklahoma, though people from other states such as Texas, Kansas, and Arkansas were also affected. These migrants faced difficult conditions in California, where they were often treated with suspicion and discrimination. The labor market was overcrowded, and many found work as agricultural laborers, performing grueling tasks for low pay. The Dust Bowl's environmental impact was not limited to the Great Plains. The dust storms spread across the country, reaching as far as the East Coast. The dust even made its way to Europe, where it caused concern about the global scale of the problem. The environmental damage in the Great Plains was so severe that it took decades for the region to recover. Soil erosion had stripped the land of its fertility, and it took years of conservation efforts to restore the soil and prevent future erosion. In response to the crisis, the federal government took several steps to try to address the disaster. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal programs included measures aimed at helping farmers, such as the creation of the Soil Conservation Service, which promoted better farming techniques to prevent soil erosion. The government also provided financial assistance to farmers who had been hit hardest by the drought and the dust storms. Programs like the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, were created to employ young men in conservation work, such as planting trees and building structures to prevent soil erosion. The government also bought land from farmers to reduce the pressure on overworked soil. One of the most significant changes during the Dust Bowl era was the shift in agricultural practices. Prior to the disaster, farming had been focused on monoculture crops, such as wheat, which left the soil exposed and vulnerable to wind erosion. After the Dust Bowl, conservation efforts emphasized crop rotation, the use of cover crops, and the planting of grass to hold the soil in place. These techniques helped restore the land's fertility and prevented future dust storms. The federal government also encouraged farmers to reduce the amount of land they cultivated and to adopt more sustainable farming practices. The Dust Bowl was not only an environmental catastrophe, but also a social and economic crisis. The farmers who lost their land during this period were among the poorest and most vulnerable members of society. Many of them had already been struggling with debt, and the loss of their crops and livelihood pushed them into even greater poverty. The Great Depression had already made life difficult for millions of Americans, and the Dust Bowl compounded these problems. The impact on the health of those living in the affected areas was also severe. The dust storms caused respiratory problems, with many people suffering from dust pneumonia. Children were especially vulnerable, and many suffered from long-term health issues as a result of exposure to the dust. The constant dust also led to psychological stress, as people were forced to live in conditions of extreme isolation and uncertainty. The emotional toll of the Dust Bowl was profound, and many families were left with nothing, both physically and emotionally. Over time, the Dust Bowl gradually ended as the drought conditions in the region improved and new farming techniques took hold. The government's efforts to combat soil erosion and improve farming practices helped restore the land. And by the end of the 1930s, the worst of the disaster had passed. However, the memory of the Dust Bowl and its devastating effects on the people and the land remained long after the storms had stopped. In the years that followed, the Dust Bowl became a symbol of both the environmental fragility of the Great Plains and the resilience of the people who lived there. It highlighted the dangers of over-farming and the need for sustainable land management. It also reinforced the importance of government intervention in times of crisis and the role of science and conservation in addressing environmental challenges. The Dust Bowl also had a lasting impact on American culture and history. The migrant families who left the Great Plains to seek work in California were often portrayed in literature and film, most notably in John Steinbeck's novel The Grapes of Wrath. The story of the Joad family, who struggled to survive in the face of economic hardship and environmental disaster, became a powerful symbol of the suffering caused by the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression. The legacy of the Dust Bowl is still felt today. While the region has largely recovered from the ecological damage, the lessons learned from the disaster continue to inform modern farming practices and environmental policy. The importance of sustainable land management, conservation, and the need for careful stewardship of natural resources are issues that remain relevant in the face of ongoing challenges like climate change and soil degradation. In conclusion, the Dust Bowl was one of the most devastating environmental disasters in American history. It resulted from a combination of natural and human-made factors, including drought, poor farming practices, and the overuse of the land. The impact on the Great Plains was severe, causing widespread economic hardship, the displacement of thousands of families, and long-term environmental damage. The federal government's response helped mitigate some of the damage, and over time, the land recovered. The Dust Bowl remains a stark reminder of the importance of environmental stewardship and the need for sustainable practices to protect the land for future generations. Welcome to the InfoSphere channel. This channel covers a wide range of topics such as history, technology, and nature. I aim to connect with you through thought-provoking, educational, and inspiring content on each of these subjects. If you enjoy exploring these areas, you're in the right place. InfoSphere is a platform that aims to embrace viewers of all ages and backgrounds. On this channel, we'll dive deep into historical events, trying to understand the major moments of the past and humanity's history. These content pieces will not only cover important wars or the rise and fall of great empires, but also the smaller yet impactful events that changed the world. History isn't just about understanding the past, it's also a valuable source for better understanding our present. Technology is another major focus of our channel. In a world where technological advancements are rapidly changing, we'll share the latest information about new inventions, discoveries, and digital transformation processes. We'll discuss advancements in AI, space technologies, biotechnology, blockchain, and many other fields. As new technologies enter our lives every day, we'll explore how these innovations will shape the future. Nature is both a major source of inspiration for our planet and humanity's history. On this channel, you'll find content that explores the incredible diversity of nature and the importance of its preservation. We'll address topics such as plants, animals, ecosystems, and climate change, the foundational elements of life. Additionally, we'll explore the positive effects of being in harmony with nature on human health. So why should you follow InfoSphere? Because this channel will not only provide you with knowledge, but also offer new perspectives, enrich your thoughts, and provide in-depth analyses on topics you're curious about. Every video will be not only educational, but also entertaining and thought-provoking. From historical events to the latest technological advancements, I aim to bring valuable insights on a wide range of subjects. If you'd like to join this journey, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can stay updated on my new videos. The Great Depression was one of the most significant economic downturns in modern history, spanning from 1929 to the late 1930s. Its impacts were felt worldwide, altering the global economic and social landscape in profound ways. Understanding its causes, consequences, and recovery efforts provides a critical lens into economic resilience and policymaking. The crisis began in the United States after a prolonged period of economic expansion in the 1920s, often called the Roaring Twenties. This era was characterized by rapid industrial growth, technological advancements, and significant increases in stock market investments. Many Americans believed the prosperity would continue indefinitely, leading to speculative investments fueled by borrowing. This speculative bubble grew unsustainably, with stock prices becoming increasingly detached from their real economic value. The stock market crash of October 1929 marked the beginning of the Great Depression. On Black Tuesday, October 29, 1929, stock prices plummeted, erasing billions of dollars in wealth virtually overnight. While the crash did not cause the depression on its own, it was a critical trigger that exposed underlying economic vulnerabilities. Banks, heavily invested in the market, suffered massive losses. This weakened the financial sector, leading to widespread bank failures and eroding public confidence in the economy. The Depression's effects on employment were catastrophic. By 1933, the unemployment rate in the United States soared to nearly 25%, with over 13 million Americans out of work. Industries like manufacturing and agriculture were hit hardest. Farmers faced additional challenges due to falling crop prices and environmental disasters such as the Dust Bowl, a series of severe droughts that ravaged the Great Plains. This combination of economic and environmental pressures forced many families to abandon their homes in search of work and better living conditions. The collapse of the American economy had a ripple effect across the globe. Countries reliant on U.S. trade and investment, particularly in Europe, also faced severe downturns. Germany, already burdened by reparations from World War I, experienced heightened economic strain, which contributed to political instability and the eventual rise of authoritarian regimes. Similarly, colonial economies in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, dependent on commodity exports, saw their revenues shrink as global demand plummeted. Governments initially struggled to respond to the crisis. In the U.S., President Herbert Hoover's administration adopted a laissez-faire approach, relying on market self-correction and voluntary action by businesses to stabilize the economy. These measures proved inadequate, and public dissatisfaction grew. The election of Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1932 marked a turning point. Roosevelt implemented the New Deal, a series of economic programs aimed at providing relief, recovery, and reform. Measures included the establishment of the Social Security system, public works projects to create jobs, and financial reforms to stabilize the banking system. While these policies did not fully end the Depression, they alleviated some of its harshest effects and laid the groundwork for long-term recovery. The Great Depression also brought about significant social and cultural changes. Families faced immense hardship, often resorting to communal living arrangements or relying on charitable assistance. Traditional gender roles shifted as women entered the workforce in greater numbers to support their households. The arts and literature of the era, influenced by widespread suffering, often reflected themes of resilience and critique of social inequalities. Iconic works like John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath captured the plight of the disenfranchised and brought attention to issues of poverty and injustice. Internationally, the crisis led to changes in economic policy and governance. Many countries abandoned the gold standard to allow for more flexible monetary policies. Governments increased their intervention in economic affairs, setting a precedent for the more regulated markets seen in the post-Depression era. The global economy began to recover gradually in the late 1930s, but it was the onset of World War II that ultimately ended the Depression. The war effort spurred industrial production and job creation on an unprecedented scale, revitalizing economies worldwide. The Great Depression remains a critical case study in economic history, offering lessons on the importance of regulatory oversight, the dangers of speculative bubbles, and the necessity of robust social safety nets. Its legacy continues to shape economic thought and policy, underscoring the interplay between economic stability, governance, and human resilience in the face of adversity. Gene therapy is an innovative medical approach aimed at treating or preventing diseases by modifying an individual's genetic material. This method addresses the root causes of genetic disorders by either replacing a faulty gene with a healthy one, inactivating a malfunctioning gene, or introducing a new gene to help the body combat a disease. By focusing on the underlying genetic issues, gene therapy has the potential to provide long-lasting or even permanent cures for conditions that were previously considered untreatable. At its core, gene therapy relies on the delivery of therapeutic genes to the patient's cells. This is typically achieved using vectors, which are specially engineered carriers designed to deliver genetic material safely and efficiently. Viruses are commonly used as vectors due to their natural ability to enter cells and integrate genetic material. However, these viruses are modified to eliminate their disease-causing properties while retaining their ability to deliver genes. Non-viral methods such as lipid-based nanoparticles and physical delivery techniques like electroporation are also being explored for specific applications. Gene therapy can be classified into two main types: somatic gene therapy and germline gene therapy. Somatic gene therapy targets non-reproductive cells, meaning the genetic changes are not passed on to future generations. This form of therapy is currently the focus of most clinical applications and trials. In contrast, germline gene therapy involves editing genes in reproductive cells, sperm, eggs, or embryos, and the changes are heritable. Germline gene therapy raises significant ethical concerns and is largely prohibited in many countries. Applications of gene therapy are diverse and expanding rapidly. It holds particular promise for genetic disorders caused by single gene mutations, such as cystic fibrosis, sickle cell anemia, and hemophilia. Beyond monogenic diseases, gene therapy is being explored for complex conditions like cancer, where genes can be modified to enhance the immune system's ability to target tumor cells. Neurological disorders, such as Parkinson's disease, and infectious diseases like HIV/AIDS, are also areas of active research and development. One of the most remarkable advancements in gene therapy has been the development of CAR-T cell therapy for cancer treatment. This approach involves genetically engineering a patient's T cells to recognize and attack cancer cells more effectively. CAR-T therapy has shown dramatic success in treating certain blood cancers, including leukemia and lymphoma, and has paved the way for further innovations in immunotherapy. Despite its potential, gene therapy faces significant challenges. Safety is a primary concern, as the introduction of genetic material could trigger unintended immune responses or cause off-target effects, potentially leading to harmful consequences. Additionally, ensuring precise and controlled gene editing remains a technical hurdle. Accessibility and affordability are also major obstacles, as gene therapy treatments are currently expensive and may not be readily available to all patients. Ethical considerations surrounding gene therapy are complex and multifaceted. Germline editing, in particular, raises questions about the potential for designer babies and unintended societal consequences. These issues underscore the need for robust ethical frameworks and regulations to guide the responsible development and application of gene therapy. In recent years, advancements in genetic engineering technologies, such as CRISPR-Cas9, have revolutionized the field of gene therapy. These tools allow for highly precise and efficient editing of genetic material, opening new possibilities for treating a wide range of diseases. As research continues to progress, gene therapy holds the potential to transform medicine and improve the lives of millions worldwide. However, careful consideration of the scientific, ethical, and social implications will be essential to ensure its safe and equitable integration into healthcare. Deepfake technology uses artificial intelligence, AI, and machine learning to create highly realistic but fake videos, images, and audio. It commonly relies on generative adversarial networks, GANs, which involve two models: a generator and a discriminator. The generator creates fake content, while the discriminator evaluates whether the content is real or fake. This iterative process allows for the production of increasingly convincing fake media. In entertainment and media, deepfakes are used to recreate actors or create entirely new content for films, television, or video games. They help bring characters to life or enhance visual storytelling. On social media, deepfake tools are often used for entertainment, where users place their faces or voices onto others, creating viral videos or memes. This playful use has spread the technology widely among online communities. In education and research, deepfake technology has the potential to bring historical figures back to life, making educational videos more engaging. It can also be used to create scientific content for research and presentations. However, the negative impacts of deepfake technology are significant. Misinformation is a major concern, as deepfakes can be used to create fake news, manipulate public opinion, and sway political outcomes. With deepfake videos, it becomes possible to deceive viewers by making fabricated content appear real, especially in sensitive or high-stakes contexts. Privacy and security are also at risk, as individuals' faces and voices can be reproduced without consent. This could lead to defamation, harassment, or exploitation of individuals. Additionally, deepfake technology enables fraud and identity theft. Criminals can impersonate others, using their faces or voices to trick people into giving away sensitive information or making financial transactions. This type of crime is increasingly difficult to detect. Another issue is the loss of trust in digital media. As deepfake technology becomes more advanced, it becomes harder to distinguish between real and fake content. This can erode public confidence in news, videos, and other online media, making it challenging to rely on digital sources for truth. Ethical and legal concerns also arise, particularly around the unauthorized use of someone's likeness or voice. Such acts can infringe on privacy rights, breach intellectual property laws, and damage reputations. Legal frameworks and regulations are needed to address the potential harm caused by deepfakes, but these laws must also consider the legitimate uses of the technology. Governments and tech companies are working on developing tools to detect deepfakes, but the rapid advancement of the technology makes this a constant challenge. Detection systems must evolve quickly to keep up with the growing sophistication of deepfakes. As the technology continues to improve, there is an urgent need for laws that protect individuals and organizations while balancing the creative and legitimate applications of deepfakes. The Enigma machine, a cipher device used by Nazi Germany during World War II, revolutionized military communication by providing a seemingly unbreakable encryption system. Designed to encode messages for secure transmission, it became a symbol of technological sophistication and a significant obstacle for the Allies. The eventual cracking of Enigma not only reshaped the course of the war, but also laid the groundwork for advancements in modern cryptography and computing. The Enigma machine's design was deceptively simple, resembling a typewriter. However, its inner workings were highly complex. The device contained a set of rotating rotors, each inscribed with the alphabet, and a plug board for additional scrambling. When a key was pressed, the machine sent an electrical signal through the rotors, scrambling the letter based on the rotor's position and plug board settings. Each keystroke altered the rotor alignment, meaning the same letter would be encrypted differently every time. With multiple rotors, plugboard configurations, and daily key settings, the number of possible encryption combinations exceeded 150 trillion, making decryption seem almost impossible without the precise settings. The Enigma's encryption capabilities were crucial for Nazi military operations. Daily settings were shared only among operators via secure key sheets, and the system's constant recalibration ensured the encoded messages remained secure. German forces believed the Enigma was unbreakable, and this confidence led to its widespread use across military branches, including the Navy, Air Force, and intelligence services. Despite its complexity, the Allies succeeded in breaking the Enigma codes through a combination of ingenuity, collaboration, and persistence. The first significant breakthroughs came from Polish cryptographers Marian Rejewski, Jerzy Różycki, and Henryk Zygalski in the 1930s. By studying captured Enigma machines and intercepted messages, the Polish team reconstructed the machine's functionality and developed methods to deduce its settings. In 1939, as the threat of war escalated, Poland shared their findings with British and French intelligence, providing a critical head start in the decryption effort. The task of regularly decoding Enigma encrypted messages fell to the codebreakers at Bletchley Park, the United Kingdom's intelligence hub. Mathematician Alan Turing played a pivotal role in this effort. Turing and his colleagues designed the bomb, an electromechanical device capable of rapidly testing potential Enigma configurations. By automating much of the decryption process, the bomb drastically reduced the time required to decode messages, enabling the Allies to act on intercepted intelligence in near real time. The decryption of Enigma messages provided invaluable insights into Nazi strategies and operations. One notable area of success was the Battle of the Atlantic, where decoded messages revealed the locations of German U-boats. This intelligence allowed Allied convoys to evade attacks, ensuring the continued flow of supplies and reinforcements to Europe. Similar breakthroughs occurred in other theaters of the war, as decrypted communications exposed troop movements, strategic plans, and logistical vulnerabilities. However, the Allies faced a critical challenge. They needed to exploit the intelligence gained from Enigma without alerting the Germans to the breach. This effort, known as Operation Ultra, involved carefully selecting when and how to use decrypted information. By disguising their sources and occasionally allowing minor attacks to succeed, the Allies maintained the secrecy of their decryption capabilities throughout the war. The impact of cracking Enigma was profound. Historians estimate that the intelligence derived from decrypted messages shortened the war by 2 to 4 years and saved millions of lives. Beyond its immediate wartime significance, the effort to break Enigma had far-reaching consequences for science and technology. Alan Turing's work at Bletchley Park is widely regarded as a foundation for modern computing. The collaboration and problem-solving approaches developed during the decryption efforts also influenced post-war advancements in cryptography, intelligence, and computer science. The legend of Oak Island, a small and unassuming island off the coast of Nova Scotia, Canada, has captured the imagination of adventurers, treasure hunters, and historians for more than 200 years. At its heart lies the enigma of the Money Pit, a seemingly bottomless, man-made shaft believed to hold untold riches or priceless artifacts. Despite countless attempts, no one has definitively uncovered the secret of what lies buried beneath its surface, though the quest has revealed tantalizing clues and deadly traps. The story begins in 1795 when a teenager named Daniel McGinnis and two friends noticed a circular depression on the forest floor. Intrigued, they started digging, uncovering what appeared to be a carefully constructed shaft. Every 10 feet, they found wooden platforms made of oak, signaling deliberate human activity. As they ventured deeper, they unearthed more curiosities. Layers of clay, charcoal and coconut fiber, an exotic material not native to the area. At around 90 feet, they discovered a flat stone with peculiar carvings, which some later translated as a cryptic warning. 40 feet below, £2 million are buried. The real mystery, however, lies not just in the treasure, but in the ingenious engineering of the money pit itself. Digging beyond 90 feet triggered a flood, filling the shaft with seawater. Later investigations revealed a network of flood tunnels connected to the ocean, seemingly designed to thwart any would-be treasure seekers. This sophisticated booby trap hints at an advanced knowledge of hydraulics and engineering, suggesting that whoever constructed it went to great lengths to protect whatever was buried there. Over the centuries, the Money Pit has drawn explorers armed with increasingly advanced tools and theories. Some believe the site contains pirate treasure, possibly from Captain Kidd or Blackbeard, while others speculate it could hold priceless historical artifacts. Theories range from Shakespeare's lost manuscripts to Marie Antoinette's jewels, the Ark of the Covenant, or even the legendary treasure of the Knights Templar. Each theory brings its own allure, adding layers of intrigue to the island's already captivating story. Despite extensive excavations, the mystery of Oak Island remains unsolved. Numerous artifacts have been recovered over the years, including a 17th-century coin, fragments of parchment, and a mysterious piece of lead traced back to medieval France, but none definitively proves what lies deeper in the pit. Modern technology has allowed treasure hunters to go further than ever, employing sonar imaging, ground-penetrating radar, and remote-controlled drilling. However, the challenges are immense. Flooding continues to be a major obstacle, and the shaft's structure remains unstable, complicating excavation efforts. Tragedy has also marked Oak Island's history. 6 lives have been lost during the search, adding a haunting dimension to the legend. According to local lore, the treasure will only be uncovered after a 7th person dies in the pursuit, further fueling the mystique surrounding the island. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, is one of the most significant events in world history. Occurring on June 28, 1914, this tragic event marked the beginning of a chain of events that ultimately led to World War I. Franz Ferdinand and his wife, Duchess Sophie, were in Sarajevo for an official visit. The city, then under the control of Austria-Hungary, had been a hotbed of tension between different ethnic and nationalist groups. On that fateful day, they were targeted by Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb nationalist and member of the secret group Mlada Bosna, Young Bosnia, which sought to end Austro-Hungarian rule over the region. Princip's motive for the assassination was rooted in his belief that the Serbs needed to be free from the Austro-Hungarian Empire's control, and that violence was a means to achieve this. After an initial failed attempt, Princip managed to shoot the couple as their car took a wrong turn and stopped directly in front of him. Both Franz Ferdinand and Sophie died from their wounds shortly after the attack. The assassination did not happen in isolation, but was part of a larger backdrop of tensions in the Balkans. Austria-Hungary's annexation of Bosnia-Herzegovina in 1908 had sparked outrage in Serbia and among ethnic Serbs living in the region. This was exacerbated by the rise of nationalist movements, which sought to break free from the empire's control. Mlada Bosna was one such group, advocating for the unification of Slavic people under a single nation, and using terrorism and violence as tools to achieve their goals. After the assassination, Austria-Hungary held Serbia responsible, and the situation quickly escalated. Russia, allied with Serbia, began mobilizing its military forces in support of the Serbs, while Germany, allied with Austria-Hungary, supported its partner. This triggered a chain reaction as various European powers, bound by complex alliances, were drawn into the conflict. Within weeks, what started as a regional conflict transformed into a global war. The death of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was not just the loss of a royal figure, but a catalyst that set off World War I, a conflict that would forever change the course of history. The war saw the fall of empires, the creation of new nations, and millions of lives lost. The aftermath of the war would also lead to the reshaping of the global political landscape, setting the stage for future conflicts, including World War II. On June 6, 1944, the world saw one of the most critical turning points of World War II, the D-Day invasion, also known as Operation Overlord. This bold, meticulously planned operation by the Allied forces would become a defining moment in the conflict and set the stage for the eventual defeat of Nazi Germany. The D-Day invasion was the largest amphibious assault in history, involving over 156,000 soldiers, supported by thousands of aircraft and ships. The goal was to open a new front in Western Europe, which had been under Nazi occupation since 1940. After years of war on the Eastern Front and with the pressure mounting on Germany, the Allies needed a breakthrough in the West to weaken Hitler's grip on Europe and liberate the continent. The invasion was launched along the Normandy coast of France, with forces landing on 5 beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. The American, British, and Canadian forces played the central roles in the landings, with American troops landing at Utah and Omaha, British forces at Gold and Sword, and Canadians at Juno. Each beach had its own unique challenges, but all were heavily fortified by the German military. Before the soldiers made their way ashore, the invasion began with extensive air raids and naval bombardments aimed at softening up the German defenses. Thousands of paratroopers were also dropped behind enemy lines to seize key positions and disrupt the Germans' ability to respond quickly to the beach landings. This was a high-risk move, as the paratroopers faced scattered drops, difficult terrain, and immediate counterattacks from the enemy. The weather on D-Day added to the complexity. Despite forecasted storms, the Allied forces decided to proceed with the invasion, and the weather remained challenging throughout the day. Strong winds, rough seas, and low visibility made the assault particularly difficult for the soldiers coming ashore. When the first waves of Allied troops landed at Utah Beach, they faced relatively light resistance from the Germans, allowing them to secure the area quickly. But at Omaha Beach, the situation was far more brutal. American forces were met with heavy machine gun fire, artillery bombardments, and a series of concrete bunkers built by the Germans along the beach. The soldiers were forced to advance under constant fire, facing devastating losses in the process. The initial waves of attack struggled to make headway, but eventually, with reinforcements and relentless determination, the beach was secured. At Gold and Sword beaches, the British and Canadians faced similar challenges. The British troops at Gold faced well-prepared German defenses, but after intense fighting, they managed to push forward. On Sword Beach, British forces encountered German counterattacks, but their relentless advance allowed them to establish their beachhead. Meanwhile, the Canadians at Juno Beach met fierce resistance, but managed to break through German lines, overcoming obstacles and securing the beachhead by the end of the day. By the end of June 6th, the Allied forces had secured all 5 beaches, but it came at a heavy cost. The exact number of casualties varies, but estimates range from 4,000 to 9,000 soldiers lost on the Allied side, with many more wounded. The German forces also suffered heavy losses, but they were unable to stop the beachheads from being established. This success on D-Day marked the beginning of the liberation of Western Europe. Over the following weeks, the Allies would continue their advance through France, eventually liberating Paris in August 1944 and pushing into Belgium and the Netherlands. The D-Day landings not only opened a new front, but also forced Germany to fight on two fronts, weakening their position and accelerating their defeat. D-Day was a moment of extraordinary courage, determination, and sacrifice. It demonstrated the ability of the Allied nations to come together to fight for a common cause, and marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. While the war would continue for nearly another year, the success of the invasion showed that victory was within reach. Today, the soldiers who fought on D-Day are remembered for their bravery, and their legacy remains a symbol of the fight for freedom and democracy. The Voynich manuscript, heralded as one of the most enigmatic and mysterious books in history, has perplexed and fascinated scholars, cryptographers, and curious minds alike for centuries. This medieval codex, believed to date back to the early 15th century, is filled with cryptic text and peculiar illustrations of plants, astronomical symbols, and bathing women. Despite numerous attempts to decode it, the manuscript's language and script remain undeciphered, sparking endless theories and speculation. The Voynich manuscript is named after Wilfrid Voynich, a Polish-American book dealer who acquired the book in 1912. It is believed to have been written in Central Europe during the Italian Renaissance. The manuscript comprises approximately 240 pages, although some pages are believed to be missing. Its vellum pages are adorned with text in an unknown script and copious illustrations, which include detailed botanical drawings, astronomical diagrams, and images of nude women, some immersed in interconnected tubes and pools of liquid. The manuscript's provenance can be traced back to the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, who ruled in the late 16th and early 17th centuries. Rudolph, an avid collector of rare and mystical items, is believed to have purchased the manuscript for 600 ducats, a significant sum at the time. The book passed through various hands over the centuries, eventually landing in the possession of Wilfrid Voynich, whose discovery of the manuscript brought it to public attention. The manuscript contains around 240 pages, filled with mysterious text and strange illustrations. These drawings can be grouped into 6 main sections: botanical, astronomical, biological, cosmological, pharmaceutical, and recipes. The botanical section features detailed drawings of plants, many of which do not resemble any known species. Some speculate that these could be imagined plants, or they might represent plants that were known only to the manuscript's author. The astronomical section is filled with diagrams of celestial bodies, zodiac symbols, and astrological charts. It's clear that the manuscript's creator had a keen interest in astronomy and astrology. Could this mean the manuscript holds some kind of astrological knowledge? The biological section is perhaps the most enigmatic, featuring numerous images of nude women engaged in various activities. Many of these women are depicted within interconnected tubes and pools of liquid, leading some researchers to theorize that this section may represent a form of medieval or early Renaissance science, possibly related to alchemy or medicine. The cosmological section contains complex diagrams and charts that defy easy interpretation. These illustrations might represent cosmological or metaphysical concepts, but we can only guess at their true significance. The pharmaceutical section combines elements from the botanical section with images of jars and containers, possibly indicating recipes for herbal remedies or alchemical preparations. It suggests that the manuscript might have been intended as a compendium of knowledge related to healing and medicine. The recipe section is primarily text-based, with occasional illustrations. This section is believed to contain recipes or instructions, possibly for the preparation of medicinal or alchemical compounds. Despite numerous theories and modern research using ultraviolet light analysis, carbon dating, and artificial intelligence, the manuscript continues to resist full understanding. Its combination of cryptic text, strange illustrations, and unknown origins ensures its place as one of the most enduring and captivating mysteries in the history of literature. The Voynich manuscript remains a powerful reminder of the mysteries that lie at the intersection of history, language, and human imagination. The mystery of the Great Sphinx of Giza is one of the most captivating and enduring puzzles in both ancient history and modern archaeology. The Sphinx, a colossal limestone statue with the body of a lion and the head of a man, stands on the Giza Plateau near Cairo, Egypt, guarding the pyramids of Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure. It is traditionally believed to represent the pharaoh Khafre, circa 2500 BCE, whose pyramid is nearby. However, the exact origins, purpose, and symbolism of the Sphinx have been the subject of intense debate for centuries. The most commonly accepted theory is that the Sphinx was built during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre, around 2500 BCE, as part of a complex associated with his pyramid. However, there are competing theories suggesting that the Sphinx could be much older. Some researchers point to geological evidence, such as the erosion patterns on the Sphinx's body, which show signs of water erosion. This has led to the hypothesis that the statue could be over 10,000 years old, possibly predating the ancient Egyptian civilization itself. This theory was popularized by geologist Robert Schoch, who argued that the erosion could have been caused by heavy rainfall, which was much more common in Egypt during a wetter climate in the distant past. The Sphinx is believed to have served as a symbol of royal power, with the lion's body representing strength and the human head symbolizing wisdom. As for its precise purpose, some scholars think the Sphinx may have functioned as a guardian for the Giza Plateau, watching over the pyramids and the tombs of the pharaohs. Others argue that the Sphinx may have had a deeper astronomical or religious significance, possibly related to the alignment of stars or the sun. The Sphinx also holds a prominent place in ancient Egyptian mythology. The creature itself, combining human and animal features, could symbolize the connection between the gods and the natural world. Some even suggest the Sphinx represents the sun god Ra, further complicating its symbolic meaning. One of the most striking features of the Sphinx is its missing nose, a subject of mystery and speculation. Over the centuries, various theories have emerged regarding its destruction. Some suggest that Napoleon's troops are responsible, claiming they shot off the nose during their Egyptian campaign in the 18th century, though there is no evidence to support this. Another widely held theory is that the nose was deliberately destroyed in the 14th century by a Sufi Muslim named Muhammad Sa'im al-Dahr, who sought to eliminate idolatry. Other theories suggest that the nose eroded over time due to natural forces. Another ongoing mystery surrounding the Sphinx is the possibility of hidden chambers or tunnels beneath it. Over the years, numerous expeditions and surveys have been conducted in search of these secret spaces, with some claiming that underground passages may contain lost knowledge, treasures, or even the tombs of ancient pharaohs. Though no definitive evidence of hidden chambers has been discovered, the idea continues to capture the imagination of many, especially those interested in lost civilizations and esoteric knowledge. Despite advancements in archaeology, the true purpose, origin, and significance of the Great Sphinx remain largely elusive. While the Sphinx is often interpreted as a symbol of royal power and divine guardianship, its enigmatic qualities continue to spark debates. The theories surrounding its age, purpose, and hidden secrets continue to intrigue both scholars and enthusiasts, ensuring that the mystery of the Sphinx will endure for generations to come. The Great Fire of London, which began on the night of September 2nd, 1666, and lasted for 4 days, remains one of the most devastating and transformative events in the city's history. It destroyed much of the city of London, but it also catalyzed significant changes in urban planning, building regulations, and fire safety, leaving a lasting legacy that shaped the modern city. London, before the fire. In the 17th century, London was a rapidly growing metropolis with a population of about 400,000. The city was densely packed, with narrow streets, overcrowded living conditions, and buildings constructed largely of timber, which were highly susceptible to fire. Thatched roofs, wooden houses, and the lack of organized firefighting efforts made the city vulnerable to frequent fires. The existing fire response was rudimentary, relying on volunteers using buckets of water and basic tools to try to contain blazes. The origins of the fire. The fire began around midnight on September 2nd, 1666, in a bakery on Pudding Lane, owned by Thomas Fariner. A spark from the oven likely ignited nearby flammable materials, and the fire spread rapidly. Fariner and his family escaped, but the flames grew uncontrollable. The combination of dry weather, strong winds, and tightly packed wooden buildings allowed the fire to spread quickly through the surrounding neighborhood. By the morning of September 3rd, the fire had spread to other parts of the city, and it was clear that it would not be easily contained. The spread and destruction. The fire raged for several days, fueled by strong winds and dry conditions. By September 4th, it had engulfed large sections of the city, including the commercial heart of London, such as Cheapside and Threadneedle Street. Iconic landmarks, including St. Paul's Cathedral, were completely destroyed. The fire destroyed approximately 87 churches, 13,000 houses, and numerous businesses, leaving around 70,000 people homeless. Despite this widespread devastation, the official death toll was surprisingly low, with only 6 recorded fatalities. Many people managed to flee the fire, though the material destruction was catastrophic. Efforts to contain the fire. At the time, London had no organized firefighting service. The only defense against the fire was a small volunteer brigade that was ill-equipped to handle such a large-scale disaster. Authorities attempted to create fire breaks by demolishing buildings, but the fire spread so quickly that the efforts were largely ineffective. The fire continued to rage until September 6th, when it finally began to subside. The aftermath and rebuilding. Once the fire was under control, the scale of the destruction was apparent. London's infrastructure, including commercial and residential areas, was decimated. However, the aftermath of the fire also provided an opportunity for the city to rebuild in a more organized and safer way. King Charles II issued a decree for the rebuilding of the city, with new regulations that required buildings to be made of brick or stone, rather than timber, to reduce the risk of future fires. The rebuilding process also led to significant changes in urban planning. New streets were laid out more widely to prevent the rapid spread of fire, and fire breaks were incorporated into the design. The famous architect Sir Christopher Wren played a central role in designing the new St. Paul's Cathedral and other important buildings, helping to establish fire-resistant building materials as the standard. Fire safety reforms. The Great Fire of London led to the creation of a more professional firefighting service, with organized brigades and better equipment to prevent future disasters. Building codes were revised to mandate fire-resistant materials, and regulations were introduced to improve the safety of both public and private buildings. These reforms were crucial in shaping the modern approach to fire safety. Legacy. Though the Great Fire caused immense destruction, it ultimately reshaped London for the better. It spurred improvements in fire safety, urban planning, and building design. The fire marked the beginning of a safer, more modern city, influencing fire prevention measures in cities around the world. Today, the fire's legacy can be seen in London's well-planned streets, fire-resistant buildings, and the continued importance placed on fire safety and urban resilience. Anne Boleyn. The second wife of King Henry VIII and the mother of Queen Elizabeth I, is one of the most iconic and tragic figures in English history. Born around 1501, Anne was the daughter of Thomas Boleyn, a diplomat, and Elizabeth Howard, a member of the powerful Howard family. Raised in an aristocratic family, Anne spent much of her early years in Europe, including in the Netherlands and France, where she was exposed to the cultured and sophisticated court life. It was in France where she received an education that was rare for women of her time, one that made her stand out when she returned to England in the early 1520s. Upon her return, Anne became a lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine of Aragon, Henry VIII's first wife. It wasn't long before Henry became infatuated with Anne. Anne's beauty, sharp wit, and intelligence set her apart from the other women in the court. However, she was not willing to become just another mistress, as Henry had expected. Her refusal only deepened Henry's obsession, and he soon became determined to make her his queen. Anne's rejection of his advances was not merely a matter of morality, it was a calculated political move. She understood that marriage, not mistresshood, would bring her the power she sought. Anne's refusal to be a mistress would spark a series of events that would change the course of English history. Henry, desperate for a male heir to succeed him on the throne, sought to annul his marriage to Catherine in order to marry Anne. When the Pope refused to annul his marriage, Henry broke away from the Catholic Church and declared himself the head of the Church of England. This decision set the stage for his marriage to Anne in 1533, and she was crowned Queen of England shortly thereafter. However, Anne's time as queen was far from secure. In September 1533, she gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth, rather than the male heir Henry desperately desired. Although Elizabeth would later become one of England's greatest monarchs, her birth, instead of a son, placed Anne in a precarious position. Henry's desire for a male heir began to erode their relationship, and his attention turned to one of Anne's ladies-in-waiting, Jane Seymour. The political landscape around Anne grew hostile, and enemies at court began to plot her downfall. In 1536, Anne's enemies, led by Thomas Cromwell, seized the opportunity to accuse her of adultery, incest, and conspiring to kill the king. These charges were almost certainly fabricated to remove her from the throne. The trial was a farce, and Anne was convicted of treason. On May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn was executed by beheading at the Tower of London. Her execution shocked the kingdom, but Anne's legacy did not die with her. Despite her death, Anne's daughter, Elizabeth, would go on to rule England for 45 years, becoming one of the most successful and revered monarchs in history. Elizabeth I's reign saw England flourish, with victories like the defeat of the Spanish Armada and the growth of English influence in the world. Anne's bloodline, though cut short, ultimately changed the course of English history. Anne Boleyn's life also played a crucial role in the English Reformation. Her marriage to Henry VIII and the subsequent split from the Catholic Church helped establish Protestantism in England, an event that would have lasting religious, political, and cultural repercussions. Though Anne's life was short, her influence endured. Her rise to power, her political savvy, and her tragic end make her a figure that continues to captivate and intrigue people around the world. Anne's story has inspired countless books, films, and historical studies, ensuring that her place in history remains cemented. Her life serves as a testament to the power of ambition, the fragility of royal favor, and the impact one woman can have on the course of history. Anne's legacy is most enduring in her daughter, Elizabeth I, who would rule England with strength and wisdom, ushering in a golden age. Through Elizabeth, Anne's influence on English politics, culture, and religion remained potent, making her one of the most fascinating figures of the Tudor era. Anne Boleyn may have lost her head, but her legacy lived on through her daughter and the lasting impact of her life on English history. The Nazca Lines are one of the most fascinating and mysterious archaeological sites in the world. Located in the arid plains of the Nazca Desert in southern Peru, these geoglyphs have captured the imaginations of researchers, historians, and the public for centuries. The lines cover an area of about 50 square kilometers and consist of over 800 straight lines, 300 geometric shapes, and 70 animal and plant figures. The purpose behind their creation remains a subject of intense debate, with several theories attempting to explain their meaning and function. In this video, we'll explore the most prominent theories regarding the Nazca Lines. One of the most widely accepted theories is that the Nazca Lines were created for astronomical purposes. Many of the lines and figures align with celestial events, such as the solstices and equinoxes, suggesting that the Nazca people used the lines to track the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. This would have been essential for their agricultural practices, helping them predict seasonal changes and plan crop cycles. For example, certain lines are said to point directly toward the setting sun during the winter solstice, a key event for marking the changing of seasons. The large scale and intricate design of the figures could have been an early attempt at creating a kind of astronomical calendar, a tool crucial for farming and religious ceremonies. Another significant theory is that the lines were part of religious or ceremonial practices. The Nazca civilization, which flourished between 200 BCE and 600 CE, had a complex belief system, and many of the figures in the Nazca lines represent animals that held spiritual significance. These include figures of a monkey, spider, hummingbird, and condor, each potentially symbolizing different deities or spirits that the Nazca people worshipped. The lines could have been created as offerings to gods in hopes of ensuring fertility, abundant crops, or favorable weather conditions. Some researchers suggest that the lines may have been a form of large-scale ritualistic art, intended to be seen by the gods from above, calling on divine powers to intervene in the natural world. A related theory involves the idea that the Nazca lines were designed to represent water and fertility, both vital resources in the dry desert environment. The region is known for its sophisticated water management systems, including aqueducts and underground channels. Some researchers believe that the lines may have been symbolic representations of water, a life-giving force in such a harsh landscape. The Nazca people's dependence on water for agriculture and survival could have led them to create these lines as a way to invoke the gods' help in ensuring water availability, particularly in a region where rainfall is scarce. There are also more speculative theories regarding the purpose of the Nazca lines. One of the more outlandish ideas is that the lines were made as markers for extraterrestrial visitors. Given that the lines can only be fully appreciated from the air, some people believe they may have been intended as landing strips for UFOs or as signals to alien civilizations. However, this theory has been largely discredited by scientists, who point to the lack of evidence supporting the idea of extraterrestrial involvement. In conclusion, the Nazca lines remain one of the most remarkable and puzzling feats of ancient human ingenuity. Whether they were created for astronomical, religious, or symbolic purposes, the lines stand as a testament to the complexity and mystery of the Nazca civilization. Their scale and alignment continue to intrigue researchers, and their cultural significance provides valuable insight into the beliefs and practices of one of Peru's most ancient peoples. What do you think the Nazca lines were for? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.